A city grid built yesterday was actually planned 2,000 years ago. This is the story of 35 rediscovered cities whose urban design predicted modern planning principles. We will journey across continents and through millennia, uncovering how ancient architects mastered zoning, sanitation, and public transit long before our time. By the end, you will see every modern street and building in a completely new light. How did a metropolis in the Indus Valley engineer a sewer system more advanced than those in medieval Europe? Why would a capital in the Andes design its buildings to never cast a shadow on each other? These ancient blueprints challenge our idea of progress itself. What forgotten wisdom is still buried beneath our own city streets? The genius of these ancient cities lies not in magical foresight, but in a deep, practical logic. When we say a design predicted the modern world, we are not suggesting a time traveler sketched a subway map. We are recognizing that brilliant minds, separated by vast distances and centuries, often arrived at the same elegant solutions to the same enduring problems. They were answering fundamental questions that every society must ask. How do we move people and goods without chaos? How do we ensure everyone has access to clean water? How do we build a community that feels both safe and connected? Modern urban planning uses steel, concrete, these questions. The ancients used stone, clay, and an intimate knowledge of the sun, the wind, and the flow of rivers. Their tools were different, but their goals were strikingly familiar. Take something as simple as getting water from a source to a home. Today, we rely on complex networks of pumps and pressurized pipes. Thousands of years ago, planners observed the simple, unwavering force of gravity. They carved channels at precise slopes, built towering aqueducts, and designed reservoirs that distributed water evenly throughout a city. This was not a primitive attempt. It was sophisticated engineering that solved the problem perfectly with the materials at hand. That is the core idea we will see repeated. It is a shift in perspective. Instead of viewing a crumbling wall as just an artifact, we learn to see it as part of a system. That layout is not a random maze. It is a traffic plan designed to slow carts and create calm neighborhoods. Those holes in the ground are not just pits. They are part of a city-wide sanitation network that protected public health. By framing these discoveries this way, the ruins transform. They become prototypes, the first working models of ideas we still use today. The true story starts when we walk through their gates and see these principles brought to life. But how do we separate true urban prophecy from simple coincidence? The answer lies in our criteria. We did not select these 35 cities because they are merely old or impressive. We chose them because their stones tell a story of deliberate, sophisticated design that echoes principles formalized thousands of years later. The first and most important filter is evidence of a master plan. We look for the architectural fingerprints of a single, governing vision laid down before the first foundation was ever dug. A city that grows organically, house by house, creates a tangled web of alleys. A planned city reveals itself in perfect right angles, in streets that run parallel for miles, in neighborhoods that repeat the same orderly layout block after block. This is the ancient signature of centralized authority and intentional design, a blueprint made physical. We then search for specific features that mirror modern urban planning goals. A premeditated street grid is not just about order. It is about efficient movement, the ancient equivalent of a traffic engineer's diagram. Centralized public spaces, like grand plazas or communal courtyards, reveal an understanding of civic life and social gathering, much like our city parks and squares today. Integrated water management is a critical marker. It goes beyond having a well. It means a city-wide network of drains, canals, and reservoirs that show a systemic approach to public health and resource distribution. We look for zoning clear separations between residential quarters, industrial workshops, and ceremonial centers. This shows a nuanced concept of land use, keeping noisy, smoky crafts away from quiet homes, a principle any modern city council would endorse. Finally, we consider how the city's very placement and walls account for defense and trade, revealing strategic thinking about its place in the wider world. Take the simple clue of a standardized brick. In an unplanned settlement, bricks will vary in size, made by different families for their own needs. But in a planned city, you will find bricks of identical dimensions across the entire site. This tells a profound story. It means a central authority established a production standard. It implies organized labor, supply chains, and a design so precise that every building block had to fit a predetermined scheme. That is the level of evidence we seek. This methodological approach filters out cities that were simply large or wealthy. It isolates those that were genuinely innovative, where the layout itself is an artifact of advanced thought. With this lens now focused, we can turn the page to our first rediscovered wonder, a metropolis where the grid was not an innovation, but the very foundation of civilization. The first blueprint for the modern city was laid in stone over 4,000 years ago. In the vast floodplain of the Indus River, a civilization built not just a settlement, but a prototype. This was Mohenjo-Daro, a name that translates poetically to the mound of the dead, but in its prime, it was anything but silent. It was a living, breathing metropolis of perhaps 40,000 people, and walking its streets today, you are not seeing haphazard ruins. You are reading a master plan. The entire city is organized on a strict grid, with wide main avenues running perfectly north-south and east-west. These arteries divided the urban landscape into large, rectangular blocks, a layout that would feel instantly familiar in Manhattan or Chicago. This was not an aesthetic choice, it was a logistical one. By creating a predictable network, the planners of Mohenjo-Daro solved ancient traffic jams before the wheeled cart was even common. Goods could flow efficiently, people could navigate easily, neighborhoods were clearly defined. It is the foundational principle of modern urban design, codified here in baked brick millennia before the term zoning was ever invented. But the genius of this city is not just on the surface, it is underneath your feet. While medieval European cities would famously toss waste into open gutters for centuries to come, Mohenjo-Daro engineered a solution of stunning sophistication. Almost every home was connected to a city-wide covered drainage system. Brick-lined channels ran beneath the streets, with carefully placed inspection holes for maintenance. Wastewater from houses would flow into these subterranean canals, which then directed it safely out of the city walls. This was not a luxury for the elite. It was a public health infrastructure that served the entire community, a systematic approach to sanitation that would not be rivaled in scale or thought for thousands of years. It speaks to a profound understanding of communal well-being, a recognition that the health of the individual was tied to the health of the city itself. At the heart of this meticulously planned city sat a structure that encapsulates its civic spirit, the Great Bath. This was a large, waterproofed public tank, built with precise brickwork and supplied with fresh water. It was likely a center for ritual purification, a communal space for gathering and ceremony. In function, it echoes the role of public baths in Roman culture, or even the social hubs of modern community centers and swimming pools. It represents a dedicated space for the people, separate from the home and the workshop, signifying that urban life required not just practicality, but also shared experience and spiritual care. Perhaps the most telling detail of all is found in the homes themselves. Archaeologists have noted a remarkable standardization. Bricks across the entire city were produced in a consistent ratio, a uniformity that implies centralized planning and supply. House layouts often repeat similar patterns, with courtyards and room arrangements that suggest a common understanding of domestic space. This points toward something we might call the world's earliest building code. There was a shared vision, a set of unspoken rules that guided construction to ensure order, stability, and perhaps even fairness. Mohenjo-Daro did not just happen. It was willed into existence by minds that thought in systems, in networks, in the long-term needs of a dense population. Its silent streets and empty baths are not just ruins. They are the first pages of the urban planning manual, waiting millennia for the rest of the world to catch up and start writing its next chapters. Yet Mohenjo-Daro was not alone in its visionary thinking. Half a world away and centuries later, another civilization would build a city not just for the people, but for the cosmos itself. In the high valley of Mexico, the builders of Teotihuacan did not merely lay out streets and buildings. They orchestrated stone and space into a physical model of the universe. At its heart is the Avenue of the Dead, a central artery so massive and precise it feels less like a road and more like a celestial pathway carved into the earth. This was not a simple north-south boulevard. Its architects aligned it exactly 15.5 degrees east of true north, a deliberate offset that modern researchers have connected to key astronomical events. On specific days of the year, the sun would set in perfect alignment with this grand axis, or a star cluster sacred to their beliefs would rise directly over the pyramid of the sun. This was urban planning as sacred geometry. Every step along that avenue was a step through a living calendar, integrating the rhythms of the heavens directly into the daily life of the city. Today, we see this principle revisited in what is sometimes called astro-architecture, where buildings are designed to harness sunlight on solstices or frame celestial phenomena, a quest to reconnect our built environment with the natural world. Teotihuacan's planners understood this connection intuitively, making the sky itself a cornerstone of their design. The city's power flows along this axis, anchored by the monumental pyramids. The Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon are not isolated temples. They are strategic anchors, creating a powerful, processional route that organized all movement and ceremony. Imagine walking that avenue, the towering structures framing your view, pulling you forward toward the Plaza of the Moon with the distant mountain peak perfectly aligned behind it. This was intentional theater. It choreographed the experience of the city, guiding both pilgrims and residents through a landscape of profound spiritual significance. This concept of using architecture to create a meaningful, narrative journey is something modern planners strive for when designing civic spaces, hoping to instill a sense of awe and communal identity. But Teotihuacan was not only a ceremonial center. It was a densely populated metropolis, home to over 100,000 people at its peak. To house this vast population, the city employed a remarkable system of standardized residential compounds. Places like the Palace of the Jaguars were not palaces for a single ruler. They were vast, apartment-like structures built around central courtyards, housing multiple families, often grouped by their trade or social class. These compounds represent an early, sophisticated approach to urban density. They provided shared spaces for community interaction while efficiently organizing a large population within a walkable, integrated city. It was a blueprint for urban living that balanced private life with public belonging, a challenge every modern city still grapples with. Ultimately, Teotihuacan's genius demonstrates how urban form can be a physical embodiment of belief and social order. The entire city was a map of their worldview, from the cosmic alignment of its main street to the hierarchical yet communal living quarters. Modern planners often speak of creating meaningful civic spaces that foster a sense of place and community. Teotihuacan achieved this not by accident but by design, weaving spiritual narrative, social structure, and practical necessity into a single, breathtaking urban fabric. Its silent avenue still tells a story, one where every stone was placed with intention, reminding us that the most enduring cities are those built not just for the body but for the soul. While Teotihuacan aligned its streets with the stars, another civilization on a different continent was reshaping the very earth to build a metropolis. Across the Mississippi River from where St. Louis stands today, the planners of Cahokia undertook one of the most ambitious public works projects in the ancient world. Between roughly the years 1050 and 1350, this was the largest settlement north of Mexico, a bustling hub where the concept of a city was being defined from the ground up, literally. Its skyline was not made of stone but of soil. The people moved over 50 million cubic feet of earth, basket by basket, to construct more than 120 earthen mounds. The centerpiece was Monk's Mound, a colossal terraced platform that rises 100 feet high and covers over 14 acres. This was not a burial site. It was an acropolis, a vast elevated platform that likely held the homes of leaders and temples for ceremony, functioning as the administrative and spiritual heart of the entire city. To stand on its summit was to look out over a meticulously organized urban landscape, a testament to coordinated labor and a shared vision on a staggering scale. At the foot of this great mound lay the Grand Plaza, a vast, open expanse covering nearly 50 acres. This was the city's living room, its central gathering space for markets, festivals, and public ceremonies. In modern terms, this is the clear precursor to a civic center or central business district. The planners of Cahokia intentionally created this huge, flat, communal zone, understanding that a city needs a defined heart where community life can pulse and interact. It was a deliberate zoning of space for public purpose, separating the monumental authority of the mound from the dynamic, social space of the plaza. This design principle, creating a central public square as the focal point for civic life, is a cornerstone of urban planning from ancient forums to modern city halls. Their connection to the cosmos was just as intentional, though built from wood instead of stone. To the west of Monk's Mound, archaeologists discovered the remains of Woodhenge, a great circle of massive cedar posts. This was a sophisticated astronomical observatory. Certain posts aligned perfectly with the rising sun at the equinoxes and solstices, turning the circle into a giant solar calendar. This was not hidden knowledge for a few priests. It was integrated into the public space, a communal clock and calendar that marked the seasons for planting, harvest, and ceremony. Imagine the entire city regulating its agricultural and ritual life by the alignments in this public park. Today, we see echoes of this in city squares that feature sundials or solar art installations, a nod to that ancient desire to weave celestial time into our daily, urban experience. The genius of Cahokia extended far beyond its impressive earthworks. Supporting a population that may have reached 20,000 people required a revolutionary approach to the surrounding landscape. This was not just a city, it was the capital of a region. Its planners managed sophisticated farming hinterlands, cultivating vast fields of corn, squash, and beans on the fertile floodplains. They established far-reaching trade networks that brought copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf of Mexico, and mica from the Appalachians. This indicates a profound understanding of regional planning and economic zoning. They were managing resources and production across a vast territory, funneling sustenance and wealth into the urban center. The city could not exist without the carefully managed countryside, and the countryside was organized to sustain the city. It was an integrated system, an early model of metropolitan planning that considered the entire region as a single, functioning organism. Cahokia's story ultimately challenges old narratives. It presents a picture of pre-Columbian North America, not of scattered tribes, but of a sophisticated, urbanized society with master planners who thought in terms of central plazas, astronomical public spaces, and regional supply chains. Their legacy is written in the grass-covered mounds that still rise silently from the Illinois plain, a reminder that the principles of great city building took root in the heart of this continent long ago. Stone walls can speak of power as clearly as any written ledger. On a savanna plateau in southern Africa, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe stand not just as an architectural marvel, but as a stone textbook on ancient economic zoning. Between the 11th and 15th centuries, this city was the thriving capital of a kingdom that controlled a vast network of gold and ivory trade. Its very layout was a physical diagram of its economy and social order, a sophisticated system of land use that any modern city planner would recognize instantly. The city was divided into 3 distinct zones, each with a clear purpose. At the summit sat the hill complex, a series of enclosures perched on a natural granite dome. This was almost certainly the royal precinct, a place of administration, ceremony, and elite residence. Its elevated position provided natural defense and, more importantly, a commanding view over the entire city and the trade routes beyond. It was a statement in stone, placing political and spiritual authority literally above all else, a principle echoed in the symbolic placement of capitals and city halls on high ground throughout history. Below the hill, dominating the visual landscape, is the Great Enclosure. Its massive, curving outer wall, standing over 30 feet high in places, encircles a space the size of a modern city block. Inside, the most enigmatic structure is a solid, conical tower, its purpose still debated by scholars. This vast compound may have served as a ritual center, a royal residence for the queen, or a secure complex for the most vital state functions. What is unmistakable is its role as a secondary yet highly protected zone of power and ceremony. The towering wall itself was not just for defense. It was a boundary marker, creating a precise separation between the innermost elite activities and the wider city, a clear zoning of space by function and status. The lifeblood of the city, however, flowed in the surrounding valleys. Here, spread across the lower terrain, were extensive settlements housing the general populace, artisans, and traders. This was the bustling economic engine of Great Zimbabwe. Archaeologists have found evidence of specialized areas for crafts like soapstone carving, iron smelting, and most importantly, gold working. The city's immense wealth flowed from the control of gold mines in the interior, and its layout was designed to manage this treasure efficiently. It is easy to envision designated zones within these valleys for processing raw ore, weighing dust, storing goods, and conducting exchange. The movement of valuable commodities could be monitored and controlled as they traveled from the outer valleys up toward the guarded enclosures on the hill. This is a pristine example of economic geography in stone, where the city's form directly facilitated and protected its primary source of power. The technique that made this precise zoning possible was the masterful dry stone walling. Builders meticulously selected and shaped granite blocks, fitting them together without any mortar. The result was not just durable, elegant walls that have withstood centuries. These walls were the ultimate tools of urban definition. They created private courtyards, marked property lines, channeled movement through specific gateways, and established the very borders between the royal, the ritual, and the commercial districts. In a modern city, we use zoning maps, street signs, and property deeds to define space. At Great Zimbabwe, the definition was built directly into the immutable landscape, a permanent record of a society that understood how to organize itself for prosperity, security, and control. The city's silent stones tell a story of a complex economy managed through deliberate urban design, proving that the blueprint for a commercial capital is an idea as old as civilization itself. The absence of walls can be as powerful a statement as their presence. In the arid Soup Valley of Peru, the ancient city of Caral rises from the desert not as a fortress but as a sanctuary. Founded over 4,600 years ago, it is the oldest known city in the Americas, and its design reveals a radical priority. Here, urban planning was not a tool for war, but an instrument for peace, ceremony, and social harmony. The city's layout is a masterclass in intentional arrangement. 6 large, stepped pyramidal platforms dominate the landscape, not scattered randomly, but carefully positioned around a vast central plaza. This was not a haphazard collection of temples. It was a unified ceremonial complex, an architectural chorus where each structure played a part in a larger ritual symphony. The central plaza served as the stage, a gathering place for the entire community to witness and participate in ceremonies that reinforced their shared identity and beliefs. This concept of a central public space as the heart of civic and spiritual life is a direct precursor to the grand plazas and squares we build today, spaces designed to foster a sense of belonging. But the precision of Caral's architects went far deeper than simple grouping. They engineered their city in harmony with the sun. Researchers have discovered that the major buildings were positioned at specific angles and distances so that, during the June solstice, no pyramid would cast its shadow upon another. This was no accident. It was a deliberate solar design, ensuring that each sacred structure was bathed in light on the most important day of the year. In modern terms, this is passive solar planning at a civic scale, using astronomy to shape the urban form for symbolic and practical effect. It shows a profound understanding of natural cycles and a desire to embed that cosmic order into the very fabric of daily life. The soundscape of Caral was as carefully curated as its sightlines. At the heart of the city lies a sunken circular amphitheater, a public space designed for performance. Archaeologists have recovered numerous flutes crafted from condor and pelican bones, and even horns made from deer and llama bones from the site. This suggests a society where music and public performance were integral to community life, not mere entertainment. The amphitheater's design would have naturally projected sound, allowing orations, music, and rituals to be heard clearly by audiences gathered in the plaza. This is ancient acoustic engineering, a direct parallel to the sound design of modern theaters, concert halls, and even open-air public venues where the shape of the space is calculated to carry voice and music. Caral understood that a city is experienced not just through the eyes but through the ears. While ceremony unified the community, the residential layout reflected its social structure. Neighborhoods were separated with distinct sectors for the elite and for craft workers. Yet crucially, all sectors had direct visual and physical access to the central ceremonial complex. No one was walled off from the spiritual and civic heart of the city. This design fostered a powerful social contract. Different classes had different living standards, but all were participants in the same cultural project. All were stakeholders in the city's ritual life. It was a form of urban planning that managed social hierarchy while actively promoting cohesion, a delicate balance modern planners still seek to achieve. The most telling feature of Caral, however, is what it lacks. After decades of excavation, archaeologists have found no trace of fortifications, no stockpiles of weapons, no depictions of warfare. In a world often defined by conflict, Caral presents a sustained, centuries-long experiment in peaceful urbanism. Its design was a tool for fostering social unity, cultural expression, and reverence for nature. It stands as a powerful, ancient argument that a city's greatest strength need not be its walls, but the bonds between those who walk its sunlit plazas and hear its music carry on the wind. This peaceful ideal, etched into the desert 4 millennia ago, remains one of urban planning's most elusive and inspiring goals. The labyrinth was not a cage, but a brilliantly organized machine. On the island of Crete, the sprawling palace complex of Knossos reveals a truth far more fascinating than myth. This was not simply a king's home, but the vibrant, beating heart of an entire civilization, a multifunctional urban core built over 1,000 years before classical Athens. Its famous winding corridors, which later inspired tales of a monstrous maze, served a masterful practical purpose. They were the connective tissue of a highly complex society, seamlessly linking vast storage magazines for grain and oil with bustling workshops, administrative scribe offices, and sacred ceremonial chambers. This intricate layout was not confusion made permanent. It was the architectural embodiment of efficiency, allowing for the smooth flow of goods, people, and information across a dizzying array of civic functions. In many ways, Knossos was a city under one roof, an ancient precursor to the modern multi-use development that combines retail, office, and public space into a single, integrated structure. The genius of its planners extended deep beneath the polished floors. While many contemporary cultures relied on wells and open drains, Knossos engineered a sophisticated, closed plumbing system. They crafted terracotta pipes, carefully tapered to increase water pressure, which delivered fresh water throughout the palace. More remarkably, they developed a drainage network that included what may be history's earliest known flushing toilet, a simple but revolutionary device that used water to carry waste away. This was not a luxury. It was a systematic approach to public health, a clear understanding that managing sanitation within such a dense complex was essential for the well-being of its many inhabitants. They were building the principles of modern hygiene directly into their walls. The palace was also designed to breathe. Large, open central courtyards and carefully positioned light wells or small open shafts pierced the multi-story structure. These features were not architectural afterthoughts. They were essential climate control systems, creating natural currents of air for ventilation and channeling sunlight deep into the interior rooms. This passive design minimized the need for artificial lighting and cooling, principles that are absolutely central to today's sustainable architecture. The builders of Knossos were masters of environmental adaptation, using the form of their building to harness the natural benefits of sun and wind, a lesson in green design that is thousands of years old. This level of coordination suggests the surrounding town was not a separate entity, but an extension of the palace's order. While the grand complex housed the central administration, storage, and high craft production, the nearby residential and commercial districts likely functioned in a symbiotic relationship with it, organized according to the needs and rhythms of the central hub. This points to a form of centralized urban management, where the palace's needs influenced the layout of the entire community, from where artisans lived to how goods flowed into the storerooms. Knossos stands as a monumental lesson in integrated planning. It shows that the most advanced urban design is not about creating isolated, single-purpose buildings, but about weaving diverse functions into a cohesive, living whole. The labyrinth, therefore, is not a puzzle of confusion, but a blueprint for connection, proving that complexity, when masterfully managed, can be the very source of a civilization's grace and longevity. Sheer cliffs became the foundation for a city. High on the Colorado Plateau, the ancestral Puebloan people did not just build on the land, they built with it, transforming the very face of a canyon into a masterpiece of vertical urbanism. For centuries, from roughly 600 to 1300 Common Era, communities at Mesa Verde pioneered a way of life that turned environmental constraint into architectural innovation. Their cliff dwellings, like the breathtaking Cliff Palace, are not isolated homes. They are entire villages suspended in sandstone alcoves, a stunning early experiment in high-density, multi-story living that speaks directly to the challenges of our own crowded cities. The choice of location was a stroke of genius. By constructing within these massive, naturally eroded recesses, the builders gained a monumental roof and a sheltered southern exposure. The overhanging rock provided crucial protection from snow, rain, and the intense summer sun, creating a form of natural insulation that regulated temperature year-round. This was passive climate control engineered directly into the site selection, a principle any modern architect seeking sustainable design would applaud. Access to these aerial apartments was a carefully managed affair, not by streets but by a network of hand and toe holds, wooden ladders, and narrow tunnels carved through the rock. This vertical circulation system forced a deliberate pace of life and created natural choke points for defense, but it also fostered a profound sense of community. Your neighbors were not just next door, they were above you, below you, connected by shared stairways and plazas. The architecture itself encouraged interaction and mutual awareness, a social blueprint built into the climb home. Within this compact vertical stack, the most vital space was often buried. The kiva, a circular, subterranean chamber entered from the roof, served as the absolute heart of each dwelling cluster. More than just a room, the kiva was a sacred gathering place for ceremonies, council meetings, and storytelling. In the dense, vertical environment of the cliff, where private space was at a premium, the kiva provided a dedicated communal hub. It was an anchor of social and spiritual life, ensuring that even in a tightly packed community, there was a profound, shared interior space for connection. This concept of a central, multi-purpose common room within a residential complex is a direct ancestor of the community centers, lounges, and shared amenity spaces we design into modern apartment buildings today. Life in these cliff cities was a daily dialogue between two levels. While the sheltered alcoves housed the community, the sunny mesa tops high above were transformed into expansive gardens. Here, the people cultivated corn, beans, and squash, capturing the full sunlight that the canyon depths denied. Water management was also ingenious, with channels carved into the rock to direct sparse rainfall into collection basins. This represents a brilliant early form of zoning, separating but intimately linking the residential zone from the agricultural and water capture zones. The entire system, the south-facing homes for winter warmth, the mesa-top fields for summer sun, the carefully channeled water, reveals a holistic understanding of the environment. They were not fighting the landscape, they were passing it, assigning specific functions to the places where nature offered the greatest advantage. The legacy of Mesa Verde is a powerful lesson in adaptive density. In a world where cities increasingly grapple with steep terrain and the need to house more people in less space, these ancient builders offer a timeless case study. They demonstrate how vertical living, when thoughtfully designed with communal spaces at its core, can create not just efficiency, but resilience and a strong social fabric. Their cities in the sky remind us that the most ingenious urban plans are often those that listen closely to the land and turn its whispers into a blueprint for living together. The logic of empire was etched in stone with a ruler's precision. On the sun-baked plains of North Africa, the Roman Emperor Trajan founded a city not for poetry or philosophy, but for pure, unadulterated function. This was Timgad, a colonial settlement built around the year 100 Common Era in what is now Algeria, and it stands as perhaps the most perfectly preserved example of Roman military urban planning in the world. Walking its ruins today is like reading a manual on imperial control, written in right angles and straight lines. The entire city was laid out as a perfect square grid, a chessboard of streets so exact it feels almost mathematical. At its very heart, where the two main avenues crossed, rose a monumental triumphal arch. This was more than decoration. It was the symbolic and physical center of the entire system, the point from which all order radiated. These main streets, the Cardo running north-south and the Decumanus running east-west, were not just thoroughfares. They were the primary arteries for moving legions, supplies, and administrators with maximum efficiency. This grid was a tool of rapid deployment and clear oversight, a blueprint for colonial control that would be copied for centuries, from Spanish settlements in the Americas to French outposts across Africa. The genius of Timgad, however, was that this military skeleton was fleshed out with all the comforts of Roman civic life. Within its rigid grid, specific blocks were meticulously allocated for public functions. There was a forum for commerce and politics, a capacious theater for entertainment, a library for scholarship, and grand public baths for hygiene and socializing. This was not a sparse garrison town. It was a fully realized Roman city, a complete cultural package dropped onto foreign soil. This layout demonstrates an early, highly deliberate form of mixed-use zoning. Residential blocks for soldiers, merchants, and local families existed side by side with these civic institutions, creating a self-contained urban unit designed to replicate Roman society abroad. It was a powerful strategy of cultural export, using urban design itself as a tool to instill Roman values, habits, and social structures in a new province. Beneath the orderly surface flowed another marvel of Roman engineering. An advanced sewer system ran directly under the main paved streets, a hidden network that managed waste and maintained public health for the dense population. This underground infrastructure was as vital to the city's function as the streets above, proving that Roman planning considered the city as an integrated system, from the Grand Arch down to the water flowing in the drains. But perhaps the most forward-thinking aspect of Timgad's design was its inherent flexibility. The original grid was conceived as a module, a repeating pattern that could theoretically expand outward forever. As the population grew, new, identical square blocks could be added to the periphery, extending the city's order seamlessly into the surrounding landscape. This is the ancient concept of scalable urban growth, a principle that governs how modern suburbs and planned communities are often developed today. Timgad was built not just for its present moment, but with a blueprint for its own future expansion. In its silent, sun-bleached stones, we see the clear logic of empire made physical. Every straight line served to ease control, every public building aimed to cultivate Roman identity, and every sewer channel worked to sustain the system. Timgad was a machine for creating Romans, a colonial blueprint so effective that its fundamental principles, the grid, the central plaza, the zoning of civic functions, would be rediscovered and reused by empires yet to come. Water was the true architect of an empire. In the humid lowlands of Cambodia, the Khmer capital of Angkor did not conquer its landscape. It performed a delicate, centuries-long negotiation with it. From the 9th to the 15th centuries, this was not a dense, walled city in the European sense. It was a vast, green metropolis spread over nearly 400 square miles, a constellation of temple complexes, rice paddies, and reservoirs woven together by water. The genius of Angkor's planners was hydrological. They understood that to master the region's brutal cycle of monsoon, deluge, and parching drought, they had to become engineers of the entire watershed. Their solution was a city-scale hydraulic system of breathtaking ambition. They constructed massive, rectangular reservoirs called barrays, the largest stretching over 5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. These were not just ponds, they were strategic water banks capturing monsoon rains to be released during the dry season. An intricate network of canals distributed this lifeblood across the urban fabric, serving 3 critical functions at once. First, they irrigated vast rice fields, turning seasonal floods into a predictable agricultural engine that could feed a population historians estimate approached 1 million people. Second, these canals formed a transportation grid, allowing goods and people to move efficiently across the sprawling, often flooded terrain. Third, and perhaps most brilliantly, the entire system acted as a buffer against catastrophe, diverting floodwaters and recharging the groundwater to prevent erosion and drought. This was medieval water-sensitive urban design, a total integration of city and ecology that modern planners now strive to recreate under terms like sponge city infrastructure. Angkor's form followed the flow of water, Instead of a single, dense downtown, the city was polycentric, a distributed network. Magnificent temple complexes like Angkor Wat and the Bayon were not isolated monuments. They were powerful nodal points, anchors of spiritual and administrative authority set within a wider cultivated landscape. Long, raised causeways connected these nodes, tracing lines across the watery plain. To live in Angkor was to experience a city of gardens and waterways, where residential compounds were nestled among the paddies and orchards, all linked by the canal network. This decentralized, low-density model bears a striking resemblance to later urban concepts like the Garden City movement or even modern suburban networks, where clusters of activity are connected by parkways and green belts. The system's ultimate purpose was resilience. By engineering a symbiotic relationship with the monsoon, Angkor's planners created stability. Reliable food production supported a huge population and fueled the empire's grandeur for centuries. The temples we marvel at today were the glorious pinnacle of a civilization built upon a foundation of managed water. Their decline, linked in part to shifts in climate and strain on this hydraulic system, offers its own profound lesson. It reminds us that even the most brilliant infrastructure has limits, and a city's health is inextricably tied to the environmental balances it depends upon. Angkor's true monument is not just stone, but the ghostly imprint of its canals on the land, a testament to the idea that the most vital urban planning often works silently beneath our feet, in the timeless dialogue between a city and the water that sustains it. Streets were an afterthought or perhaps an unnecessary luxury. In the fertile plains of central Turkey, the people of Çatalhöyük built a city not around public roads but around the private home. From roughly 7,500 to 5,700 before the Common Era, this sprawling settlement of perhaps 8,000 souls grew not outward but inward in a dense, living mosaic of mud brick. Its defining feature was the absence of something we consider fundamental to any town. There were no streets, no alleys, not a single passageway at ground level. Instead, houses were built directly against one another, sharing walls in a continuous, agglutinative mass that resembled a giant, organic honeycomb. To move through this city, you did not walk down a lane. You climbed across a shared rooftop landscape, descending through a hole in your own roof by a wooden ladder into the single, rectangular room that was your entire home. This was urbanism turned inside out, where the exterior was a communal platform and the interior was a deeply private, sacred world. The rooftop was the true public square of Çatalhöyük. This continuous, elevated plain served as the settlement's streets, plazas, and communal workspaces all at once. Neighbors would interact, children would play, and daily chores would be performed under the open sky, with the sturdy, flat roofs of the entire city forming a single, unified stage. This concept of using rooftops as primary circulation and social space is a stunning ancient parallel to modern architectural visions of pedestrian skybridges, elevated greenways, and roof gardens designed to reclaim space in dense urban centers. It was a brilliant adaptation that maximized security, as the blank, windowless exterior walls presented a formidable barrier while fostering constant, casual contact among residents in the shared space above. Inside each home, life was intensely focused. The single room served all purposes: living, sleeping, cooking, and craftwork, but it was far from a simple shelter. The walls were often adorned with elaborate paintings depicting hunting scenes, geometric patterns, and mysterious symbols. The floors held the resting places of family members, with individuals buried beneath the platforms used for daily life. This practice created a profound, tangible link between generations, blending the domains of the living and the ancestors into a single, continuous domestic sphere. The home was not just a house, it was a microcosm of their universe, a place where daily routine, artistic expression, and spiritual memory were woven together. This deep integration of domestic and spiritual life suggests a society where the primary unit of belonging and meaning was the household, and the city's form emerged directly from that powerful social norm. Çatalhöyük's radical design presents a fundamental challenge to our assumptions. It proves that urban planning does not require geometric order, grand axes, or even streets to create a successful, enduring community. Its organization was not top-down but social. The city grew organically, house by contiguous house, as new families built their homes adjacent to existing ones, following an unspoken cultural template. This created an urban fabric of incredible resilience and social cohesion. The very architecture enforced a tight-knit community. Your neighbor's wall was literally your wall, and your roof was their pathway. This model prioritized privacy, security, and the sanctity of the household unit above all else, fostering bonds so strong they shaped the very clay of the city itself. In its silent, room-by-room growth, Çatalhöyük offers a timeless lesson. Sometimes the most sophisticated urban plan is not a ruler's decree, but the physical echo of how a community truly wishes to live together, turning every roof into a common ground and every home into a world entire. A single structure could command the entire life of a city. In the sun-scorched plains of ancient Sumer, the great ziggurat of Ur rose like a stairway to the heavens, built around 2100 years before the Common Era. This was far more than a place of worship. It was the central processor of an entire urban system, a massive stepped pyramid that functioned as the anchor for a meticulously organized civic plan. The ziggurat did not stand alone. It was the heart of a vast, walled sacred precinct, a district that contained all the essential machinery of the city-state. Within its boundaries, archaeologists have found the remains of administrative offices where scribes tallied goods, workshops where artisans crafted luxury items, and extensive storage magazines holding the community's grain, oil, and wealth. This was an early, brilliant prototype of a centralized civic administrative district. Everything that powered the city, its governance, its key crafts, its economic reserves, was physically clustered around the spiritual core. It was a masterstroke of urban efficiency, placing the levers of divine, political, and economic authority in one symbolic and highly secure zone. From this powerful core, the city's residential neighborhoods unfurled. While the exact street patterns are lost to time, the logic of the layout is clear. Homes and smaller workshops likely spread outward, following paths that either radiated from the sacred precinct like spokes from a hub or encircled it in organized rings. The towering ziggurat was the constant visual reference point, its terraced bulk visible from across the city, a daily reminder of the central authority that ordered daily life. This created a powerful urban hierarchy. The closer you lived to the ziggurat, the nearer you were to power and prestige. The entire city's geography was a map of social and spiritual proximity, organized by the pull of this single, monumental axis. Building such a colossus was itself a lesson in urban management. The ziggurat's construction, using millions of mud bricks, required a staggering feat of logistics. It demanded organized labor forces, standardized brick production, and sophisticated engineering to create its stable, terraced form. This project proves the existence of a centralized authority capable of large-scale urban project management. They were not just building a temple, they were demonstrating their ability to mobilize and coordinate an entire society, turning human effort into a permanent testament to their power and piety. The very act of construction was a display of civic planning in motion. We see the ghost of this model in our own cities today. Think of a state capitol building, its dome dominating a city's skyline, surrounded by halls of justice, government offices, and official archives. Or consider a major museum complex or a vast central park that becomes the symbolic and geographic heart of a metropolis. with neighborhoods and property values defined by their relationship to that central space. The ziggurat of Ur established this enduring blueprint, using a dominant central monument to organize the urban fabric, define civic identity, and impose a clear, visible order on the community. It was architecture as the ultimate organizing principle, proving that to shape a city, you must first give its people a shared landmark to look toward, a common peak that gives meaning to every street below. A city could choose not to grow, but to be reborn beside itself. On the sun-baked plains of Turkmenistan, the oasis of Merv presents a different kind of urban genius. From the 6th century before the Common Era onward, this was not a single, sprawling metropolis that slowly changed its skin. Instead, it became a sequence of distinct, walled cities built side by side across the centuries, each a complete urban statement nestled against the ruins of its predecessor. This was sequential planning on a grand scale, a physical timeline of empires where you could literally walk from one era into the next by crossing a field. When a new dynasty rose to power, or when the population simply outgrew its walls, the planners of Merv did not simply bulldoze the old to make way for the new. They designed an entirely new city right next door with its own formidable walls, its own fortified citadel, and its own internal infrastructure. Yet, crucially, these new cities were not isolated islands. They remained connected to the older urban fabric through roads, canals, and the relentless flow of trade. The result was a living palimpsest, a layered manuscript of urban design where a Sasanian fortress might stand a stone's throw from a Seljuk Grand Mosque, each district reflecting the architectural language and priorities of its own moment in history. You can see this same principle in modern cities like London or Rome, where a medieval lane sits beside a Georgian square, which in turn leads to a glass and steel financial district. Merv simply made this historical layering its explicit, intentional strategy for growth. The lifeblood of this sequential city was commerce, and its layout was a masterclass in early transit-oriented development. As a crucial hub on the Silk Road, Merv's planners understood that its wealth flowed from the caravans that snaked across the desert. They meticulously positioned sprawling bazaars and secure caravanserais, the roadside inns for travelers and their animals, along the primary trade routes that entered and connected each walled city. This ensured that goods, merchants, and news could move with maximum efficiency from gate to market to warehouse. Water was the other critical infrastructure. Ambitious projects like the Sultan's Canal were engineered not just to irrigate fields, but to sustain the growing chain of urban centers, demonstrating that each new city's plan had to integrate with a regional, life-supporting hydraulic system. This was planning that saw the city not as a fixed point, but as a dynamic node in a continental network. The true lesson of Merv is one of adaptive evolution. It shows a profound respect for the past, not through preservation in amber, but through a kind of architectural dialogue. Each new city was a fresh canvas, allowing planners to apply the latest innovations in fortification, sanitation, and public space design without being constrained by the outdated street patterns of the old. Yet, by physically connecting to what came before, they maintained continuity of community and economic function. This model offers a powerful alternative to the common historical pattern of conquest through erasure. Merv suggests that a city can honor its history not by freezing it, but by building its future respectfully alongside it, creating a tapestry where every thread from every era remains visible in the final, magnificent pattern. The desert itself demanded a city built for passage. In the vast, arid expanse between the Roman and Parthian empires, the oasis of Palmyra did not simply exist, it performed a vital function. From the 1st to the 3rd centuries of the Common Era, this was the ultimate caravan city, a glittering stopover where the logistics of long-distance trade dictated every stone of its design. Its entire urban plan was a machine for welcoming, servicing, and guiding the endless flow of merchants, camels, and goods across the Syrian desert. The city's magnificent spine was the Grand Colonnade, a breathtaking avenue nearly 4,000 feet long, lined with hundreds of towering columns. To the weary traveler arriving from weeks of empty dunes, this was more than a beautiful street. It was a clear, ceremonial, and utterly practical guide. This monumental corridor functioned as a grand processional way, leading travelers directly from the city's western gate to the spiritual and commercial heart of the city, the colossal Temple of Bel. It was a path you could not miss, a built-in navigation system that ensured every visitor and their valuable cargo flowed smoothly toward the center of activity. The columns themselves were not mere decoration. Many had projecting brackets halfway up, which once held statues of wealthy citizens and caravan patrons, turning the street into a public gallery of civic pride and commercial success. This was urban design as both branding and behavioral guide, using grandeur to direct traffic and inspire confidence in the city's prosperity. Flanking this grand avenue was where the city truly came to life. Narrow side streets branched off, housing a continuous, vibrant ribbon of commerce and care. Here, travelers would find everything needed to recover from the desert and prepare for the next leg of the journey. Shops offered supplies and traded exotic goods. Inns known as caravanserais provided secure courtyards to rest animals and merchants, and public baths offered a chance to wash away the dust of the road. This created a perfect ancient example of a mixed-use corridor. Monumental ceremony, retail commerce, hospitality, and personal hygiene were all zoned along the same efficient, linear system. In a very real sense, Palmyra's main street was an ancient prototype for a modern airport terminal or highway service plaza, where every need of the transient visitor is anticipated and placed in logical sequence along their path. The city's layout was a form of strategic hospitality, optimizing the brief stopover to maximize comfort, security, and commercial exchange. Sustaining this lush oasis of commerce in the desert required a hidden hydraulic genius. Palmyra's planners mastered the arid environment through an extensive network of underground aqueducts known as qanats. These were gently sloping tunnels dug deep into the earth, tapping into groundwater from distant mountain foothills and channeling it silently toward the city. The water was then stored in large, fortified reservoirs, creating a reliable reserve for drinking, bathing, and watering the gardens that made the oasis possible. This invisible infrastructure was the city's lifeline. It allowed a permanent, thriving urban center to exist where none should, supporting not only the local population, but also the constant influx of thousands of travelers and their livestock. The sophisticated water management was the unspoken foundation upon which all the visible grandeur and commercial hustle depended. It was a lesson in environmental adaptation, proving that a city's greatness is often rooted in the brilliance of its unseen systems. Ultimately, Palmyra's urban design was a masterful blend of symbolism and sheer practicality. The soaring columns and grand temple projected power, stability, and divine favor to inspire trust in merchants from across the known world. Simultaneously, the practical layout of inns, baths, and warehouses addressed their most immediate physical needs. The city existed for the caravan, and its every street and building was shaped to serve that single, flowing purpose. It was a hub built entirely around the experience of the traveler, a seamless fusion of monumental aesthetics and pragmatic hospitality that turned a necessary stop in the desert into a legendary crossroads of civilization. The city itself was a classroom. In the verdant valley of ancient Gandhara, where the trade routes from India met the passes to Central Asia, Taxila grew not just as a market, but as a magnet for the mind. For over a millennium, from around 1,000 years before the Common Era to 500 Common Era, This was a city where the urban plan was not dictated by kings or gods alone, but by the pursuit of knowledge. Its most profound innovation was its role as home to one of the earliest known universities in the world, a place where the very layout of the streets and buildings was designed to foster intellectual life. This was not a campus as we picture it today, a walled-off enclave. At Taxila, learning was woven directly into the city's fabric, creating an ancient prototype of the college town, a place where urban form existed to support the life of the mind. The physical heart of this intellectual city was the Julian Monastery, a sprawling complex that functioned as a residential college, library, and lecture hall all in one. But the genius of Taxila's design was how this core of learning radiated outward, shaping the surrounding neighborhoods. Archaeologists have identified distinct residential quarters that likely housed scholars and students, quiet zones set apart from the bustle of the main bazaars. Open courtyards and shaded groves were integrated as spaces for discussion and debate, the ancient equivalent of a university quad or a coffee shop where ideas could flow freely. This was a deliberate zoning for contemplation, a recognition that a thriving intellectual community required specific kinds of spaces for solitude, for conversation, and for communal study. The city's plan provided the stage for the daily drama of learning. This vibrant center of thought was supercharged by its geographic position. Taxila sat at a historic crossroads, a key node on the Silk Road network where caravans from Persia, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent converged. With the traders came not just silks and spices, but philosophies, scientific texts, and artistic traditions. A Buddhist monk from China might debate a Hindu scholar from the south, while a Greek geometrician, influenced by the legacy of Alexander's passing, shared diagrams with a local master of medicine. Taxila became a living library of the ancient world, where knowledge was not hoarded but actively cross-pollinated in its public squares and lecture halls. The city's layout, with its inviting public spaces and integrated residential quarters for outsiders, actively facilitated this exchange, making the flow of ideas as vital to its economy as the flow of goods. What we see in Taxila is the birth of a powerful urban principle, the knowledge cluster. By concentrating teachers, students, libraries, and debate spaces in a walkable, interconnected district, the city created a fertile ecosystem for innovation. This is the same core logic that drives modern university towns from Oxford to Cambridge, and the planned innovation districts of our own era, like Silicon Valley or Kendall Square. These places understand that breakthrough ideas often happen through casual collision and sustained conversation, facilitated by an environment designed to bring curious people together. Taxila's planners intuitively understood this centuries ago, building a city where a philosopher could walk from his lodging to a lecture, stop in a garden to argue a point with a colleague from a distant land, and then browse texts in a library, all within a single, intellectually charged neighborhood. The city was the campus, and the campus was the city. Ultimately, Taxila presents a vision of urban life where commerce and contemplation were not opposing forces, but symbiotic partners. The wealth from trade funded the institutions of learning, and the prestige of those institutions attracted more wealth and more brilliant minds. Its design demonstrates that a city can be planned not just for power or for commerce or for ceremony, but explicitly for the expansion of human understanding. In its quiet ruins, we find the blueprint for a community built around a simple, revolutionary idea: that the greatest resource a city can cultivate is not in its warehouses, but in the minds of those who walk its streets. A capital's strength was measured by the weight of its walls and the depth of its records. Perched on the rugged Anatolian plateau in modern Turkey, the Hittite capital of Hattusa stood for centuries as a fortress of stone and clay, a city engineered for endurance. Its planners faced a fundamental challenge: how to protect the heart of an empire in a landscape of hills and ravines. their answer was a defensive scheme of brilliant adaptability. Instead of forcing a geometric grid onto the difficult terrain, they let the land itself dictate the city's form. They constructed miles of monumental cyclopean walls, so named for their massive, irregular stones, that snaked along the ridges and cliffs, turning every hilltop and outcrop into a natural bastion. Gates were not mere openings, but sophisticated choke points like the famous Lion Gate and the Sphinx Gate, their imposing sculptures serving both as spiritual guardians and psychological deterrents. This was defensive planning in harmony with geography, creating a layered perimeter that made the city a daunting puzzle for any attacker. Within this formidable shell, Hattusa was carefully zoned for function. The city was split into two clear levels. The high ground, or upper city, was reserved for the sacred. Here, the footprints of numerous temples speak to a district dedicated entirely to ritual and ceremony, placing the gods literally above the daily workings of state. Below, in the lower city, sprawled the administrative and residential quarters. This separation was a masterstroke of ancient urban logic. It created a clear spatial hierarchy, the divine realm overseeing the human one, with each district serving its purpose without interference. The bustling administrative zone housed the palaces, offices, and barracks where the empire's vast bureaucracy managed everything from military campaigns to grain shipments. This orderly division of sacred and secular space is a principle we still see in capitals today, where monumental government districts are often set apart from commercial hubs, each designed for its specific civic role. Yet the true nerve center of Hattusa was not a wall or a temple, but a library. In the lower city, archaeologists uncovered the Royal Archives, a dedicated building housing thousands of fired clay tablets. This was not a haphazard collection. It was a systematically organized repository of knowledge, the empire's central hard drive. The tablets contained treaties with foreign powers, detailed legal codes, meticulous inventories, religious texts, and correspondence. This reveals a stunning priority. The Hittites understood that information was as critical to imperial survival as soldiers or grain. By planning for a secure, centralized archive, they ensured continuity of law, diplomacy, and cultural memory. The very existence of this library building points to a society that planned for the mind, institutionalizing knowledge as a pillar of governance. It is a direct ancestor to our national archives, secure data centers, and governmental record halls, all designed to preserve the operational memory of a state. Hattusa's legacy is this powerful fusion of muscle and memory. Its walls provided the physical resilience to withstand siege, while its archives provided the administrative resilience to manage an empire across generations. The city functioned as a single, resilient organism. The defensive shell protected the bureaucratic brain, and the organized records within allowed that brain to make informed decisions for centuries. This blend of militaristic defense with centralized knowledge management created a blueprint for the fortified capital, a model where security and information flow are the twin foundations of power. Walking its silent gates today, you sense a city built not for grandeur alone, but for perpetual readiness, where every stone and every written word was a calculated investment in survival. The mandate of heaven was not a metaphor, but a city plan. In the 14th century, the Hongwu emperor of the Ming dynasty faced a monumental task to design a capital worthy of a new, powerful China. He chose the site of Nanjing, and his vision went far beyond walls and streets. He sought to build a cosmic diagram in stone and water, a terrestrial mirror of the celestial order. This was urban planning as an act of profound philosophy, where every hill, every gate, and every canal was placed according to ancient principles of harmony and power. The city would not just house an empire, it would physically demonstrate the emperor's divine right to rule, his unbreakable connection to the forces of the universe. The most immediate testament to this ambition is still visible today in the staggering scale of its fortifications. Nanjing's city walls are the longest ever constructed, stretching over 21 miles. But their genius lies not just in their length but in their adaptive design. Instead of imposing a rigid geometric line, the builders followed the natural contours of the land. They incorporated the slopes of Purple Mountain and the curves of the Qinhuai and Yangtze rivers directly into the defensive scheme. This created a wall that was both a formidable military barrier and a respectful embrace of the landscape. It was a lesson in defensive planning that worked with nature, not against it, turning the entire environment into a component of the city's strength. Within this colossal protective shell, the city's layout unfolded with deliberate, symbolic asymmetry. Unlike the rigid Roman grid or the perfect square of later Beijing, Nanjing's plan was organic yet meticulously calculated. At its heart lay the imperial palace complex, the forbidden city of the early Ming. This was the absolute center of the cosmic model, the terrestrial pole star. The entire city was oriented on a strict north-south axis, with the palace aligned to face south, the direction of life and vitality in traditional Feng Shui. This alignment was not superstition. It was a sophisticated system of environmental and spatial reasoning, ensuring the most auspicious flow of energy, or Qi, while also accounting for sunlight and seasonal winds. Major avenues radiated from this central axis, creating a hierarchy of movement that mirrored the Confucian social order. The widest, most direct routes were for imperial processions and state functions, while a finer network of canals and smaller streets serviced the bustling markets and residential wards. This integrated transport system was a marvel of practical engineering. The canals were not afterthoughts. They were planned arteries for moving grain, goods, and people, connecting the city to the vital water networks of the Yangtze region. They brought economic lifeblood into the very core of the capital, ensuring that the cosmic model was also a functioning, prosperous metropolis. Every district, from the scholarly quarters to the artisan workshops, had its designated place, reflecting a society where everyone and everything had a proper role. Nanjing's design was therefore a physical manifestation of ideology. The city itself was a tool of statecraft, its form projecting an image of unshakable order, harmony with heaven, and benevolent centralized power. It showed how urban planning could be used to cement legitimacy and guide social behavior. For modern developers, Nanjing offers a profound lesson in culturally sensitive design. It proves that the most functional and resilient urban plans can emerge from deep engagement with local knowledge systems, with traditional understandings of ecology, climate, and social structure. The city was not built on a blank slate according to a universal template, but was a unique conversation between imperial ambition, philosophical tradition, and the specific genius of its place. Its silent walls and vanished palaces whisper that a city's true strength may come from honoring the wisdom of its own landscape and history, building not just for efficiency but for meaning. The rainforest was not an obstacle but a partner. In the dense green heart of the Campeche region, the Maya city of Calakmul achieved something that feels almost miraculous today. It built a vast, powerful civilization not by conquering the jungle, but by weaving a city directly into its living fabric. From roughly 250 to 900 of the Common Era, this was not a dense, stone-packed urban core like many we have seen. Instead, it was a sprawling, low-density metropolis where neighborhoods were nestled among orchards, where pyramids rose above a canopy of food-bearing trees, and where the boundary between city and forest simply dissolved. This was the ultimate forest garden, a model of urbanism that saw the ecosystem not as raw material to be cleared, but as the foundational system to be cultivated and integrated. The genius of Calakmul's planners was one of subtle modification. They did not engage in wholesale deforestation. Instead, They practiced a sophisticated form of agroforestry, selectively planting, pruning, and nurturing the existing rainforest to create a productive mosaic. They cultivated groves of fruit trees like avocado and sapodilla, interplanted them with crops like maize and beans, and managed the forest to encourage useful plants and animals. Residential compounds were not crammed together. They were dispersed across this verdant, food-producing landscape, each household likely surrounded by its own productive garden plot. The city itself became a continuous source of sustenance, blurring the line between where people lived and where their food grew. This is a stunning ancient parallel to modern concepts like food forests, permaculture, and the very idea of the biophilic city, which seeks to make nature a central, functional part of the urban experience. To connect this sprawling, green city, the Maya engineered a network of sacred roads known as sakbiob. These were raised causeways paved with white limestone and built up above the often flooded forest floor. They radiated out from the monumental core of Calakmul, linking its central plazas and towering pyramids to outlying residential districts, satellite communities, and vital resource areas. Walking these white roads through the green jungle must have been a profound experience, a clear, maintained path through a managed wilderness. In function, these causeways were the ancient equivalent of parkways or greenways. They were not just transportation corridors for moving people and goods. They were linear public spaces that structured movement while maintaining a direct connection to the natural world. They allowed the city to function as a cohesive political and economic unit without sacrificing its essential, integrated relationship with the environment. Water, the lifeblood of any society, was managed with equal ingenuity. In a landscape with no major rivers, the Maya became masters of capture and storage. They constructed large, carefully lined reservoirs called aguadas, strategically placed to collect precious rainwater during the seasonal downpours. These were not mere ponds. They were public utilities, critical infrastructure that sustained the population through the dry months. The placement and maintenance of these reservoirs would have been a central concern of urban management, a clear example of planning for long-term resilience in a challenging climate. The entire system, the managed forest gardens, the dispersed homes, the connecting causeways, and the catchment reservoirs, paints a picture of a sustainable, food-producing city. Calakmul challenges one of our most stubborn assumptions about civilization, that complexity and scale require high-density urban form, with clear separation between urban space and agricultural land. Here, the agriculture was the urban fabric. The city was its own hinterland. This integrated model supported a large and sophisticated society for centuries, with a population that may have reached 50,000 people or more, all living within a cultivated forest. Its eventual decline, linked to prolonged drought and perhaps overstrain on this delicate balance, offers its own sobering lesson in environmental limits. Calakmul's legacy is a powerful whisper from the past, suggesting that the future of our own cities might not lie in building higher and denser alone, but in learning how to build smarter within nature's own systems. It presents a vision where the city is not a separate entity, but a symbiotic part of a living, breathing whole. A city's lifeblood flowed through the stone itself. While Petra's breathtaking tombs carved from rose-red cliffs capture the imagination, they are merely the facade of a deeper, more vital genius. The Nabatean capital, thriving from the 4th century before the Common Era to the 1st century of our era, was not built in the desert in spite of water, but because of an unparalleled mastery over it. In a landscape defined by brutal aridity and sudden, violent flash floods, Petra's planners performed a miracle of hydraulic engineering. They transformed a deadly environmental challenge into their greatest strategic asset, creating an urban design where every building, every street, and every tomb was ultimately placed in conversation with the flow of water. The city's famous entrance, the Sick, is a perfect example of this dual purpose. This narrow, winding gorge is a natural wonder, but the Nabateans saw it as the main conduit for their most precious resource. They lined its walls with ceramic pipelines and carved channels, turning the entire passage into a covered aqueduct that delivered clean water into the heart of the city, while the paved floor below carried ceremonial processions and trade caravans. It was infrastructure and ceremony fused into a single, awe-inspiring experience. This system extended far beyond the sick. Across the surrounding mountains, engineers constructed an intricate network of dams to capture and divert the destructive energy of seasonal floods. They carved vast cisterns into the bedrock, hidden reservoirs that could store millions of gallons of rainwater, ensuring a reliable supply through the long, dry months. This was not a piecemeal solution. It was a city-wide, integrated hydraulic grid, a pre-industrial utility company etched into the landscape. The placement of Petra's magnificent buildings reveals the logic of this system. Tombs and temples were not positioned solely for dramatic effect. They were strategically located in relation to these water sources and the protected trade routes that water made possible. A merchant caravan, after weeks in the desert, would find at Petra not just a market, but guaranteed water, security, and a display of power that proclaimed the Nabateans' divine right to control this essential resource. The city's very form was a testament to controlled abundance in a land of scarcity. In this way, Petra represents a profound principle of urban design, one increasingly critical today. The city's architecture did not dictate where the infrastructure would go. The infrastructure, specifically the life-giving, life-threatening system of water, dictated the form and placement of everything else. This is a lesson in environmental determinism of the most sophisticated kind. For modern cities in arid regions facing the intensifying pressures of climate change, Petra stands as an ancient case study in resilience. It teaches that survival and splendor are not opposites, but can be achieved through the same act of intelligent design. The silent, water-worn channels in the sick ask us a pressing question. In our own urban centers, are we building monuments that ignore our environment, or are we crafting systems, visible and invisible, that listen to the land and turn its constraints into the foundation for enduring life? A wall could mark more than a border. It could define a new kind of space where two worlds deliberately converged. In the rolling grasslands of Inner Mongolia, the great Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan commanded the construction of his summer capital, Shangdu, in the 1250s. To the Western world, immortalized in verse, it became known as Xanadu. This was no mere seasonal retreat. It was a profound architectural statement. A city meticulously planned not just for grandeur, but as a physical instrument of unity. Its design was a conscious fusion, a blueprint for an empire that stretched from the Pacific to the Black Sea, where Mongol steppe traditions met the settled sophistication of Chinese civilization. The city's layout was a map of this hybrid identity. An outer, sprawling enclosure provided space for commoners, markets, and importantly, vast open grounds where the traditional felt tents or jurs of the Mongol elite could be erected. This preserved the nomadic sense of mobility and open sky, even within a fixed capital. Then, within a second inner wall, rose a more formal Chinese-style complex of palaces and administrative halls, arranged with the symmetrical precision and geomantic alignment that grounded the empire in the ancient principles of the land it now ruled. The entire settlement was then enveloped by a colossal hunting park, a managed wilderness that served as both a recreational preserve and a living reminder of the Mongol connection to the natural world. This was not a chaotic mix of styles, it was a layered, intentional synthesis. Each element served a dual purpose. The open spaces allowed for the continuation of the great gatherings or kurultais that were central to Mongol political life, while the permanent palaces projected the enduring, heavenly mandate of a Chinese emperor. Marco Polo, who likely visited, described its marvels, capturing for Europe the image of a palace of rare beauty, its halls painted with gold and brilliant colors. But beyond the gilt, the true marvel was the plan itself. Xanada's design was a tool of political theater and integration. By incorporating the forms of both the tent and the throne room, Kublai Khan visually legitimized his rule to all his diverse subjects. A Mongol warrior could feel at home in the expansive outer grounds, while a Chinese scholar official could navigate the ordered inner city with familiar cultural logic. The city physically demonstrated that this new Yuan dynasty was not a conquest that erased, but an administration that could encompass. In this way, the planners of Xanadu tackled a challenge incredibly relevant to our own globalized era. How do you design a shared space for a multicultural identity? They answered by creating zones of coexistence, where different cultural practices were given their own dignified place within a unified, greater whole. The summer capital became a stage where the ritual of empire was performed, blending the horseback agility of the steppe with the ceremonial weight of the forbidden city. It showed that urban planning could be an act of translation, building a common ground in literal stone and earth. The legacy of Xanadu whispers to modern city builders facing similar questions of integration. It suggests that the most resilient urban spaces may not enforce a single, monolithic culture, but instead thoughtfully weave together the threads of different traditions, creating a fabric that is stronger for its diverse patterns. The city's grass-covered ruins now sleep under the same wide Mongolian sky they were designed to embrace, a silent testament to the power of a plan that sought not to choose between worlds, but to build a new one from the best of both. The city itself was a walking prayer. In the rugged heart of southern India, the capital of the Vijayanagara Empire was not simply built on the land. It was a deliberate echo of a divine blueprint. From the 14th to the 16th centuries, its planners designed an entire metropolis as a physical manifestation of sacred geography. Every street, every temple, every market stall was positioned not for convenience alone, but to weave the spiritual and the mundane into a single, seamless tapestry of urban life. This was a ritual landscape, a place where the act of moving through the city was itself an act of worship. A principle that resonates deeply with modern efforts to create cities that nourish the human spirit as well as the body. The holy Tungabhadra River was the city's spiritual and physical spine. Unlike a water source tucked to the side, this river was the central organizing feature. The city's layout unfolded along its sacred banks, with major roads and pathways designed to provide constant visual or physical access to its waters. Pilgrims and residents alike would have been guided by the river's presence, using it for ritual bathing, daily chores, and as a perpetual reminder of the divine flow that sustained all life. This integration of a natural sacred feature directly into the urban core is a powerful ancient example of biophilic design, where nature is not an amenity but the foundational element of the city's identity. From this liquid axis rose the architectural anchors of faith. Grand temple complexes like the magnificent Virupaksha temple were not isolated monuments. They were the powerful nodes from which the city's daily rhythms emanated. The widest, most important roads were essentially processional routes, leading directly to these temple gateways. Imagine walking such a street. Your journey would be flanked by bustling bazaars, their vendors selling flowers, lamps, and offerings. You would pass large, intricately carved stepwells and public tanks, providing water and cool respite. Residential quarters for different communities were organized along these same sacred corridors. This was a masterful form of mixed-use zoning, but with a profound spiritual purpose. Commerce, community, and infrastructure all existed to support and participate in the act of pilgrimage. Your trip to the market was part of a sacred journey, Your draw of water from a public tank was a moment in a larger ceremonial flow. The royal center, with its imposing audience halls, pleasure pavilions, and ornate baths, formed its own distinct zone, yet it was not walled off from this sacred fabric. It was integrated, positioned within the same ritual geography. The king's palace and administrative buildings were placed with strategic sightlines to the major temples, visually and symbolically linking secular power to divine sanction. The ruler could literally look out from his halls and see the temples that legitimized his reign, while the people could see the royal precinct as part of the sacred landscape they all shared. This careful placement reinforced the idea that governance itself was a sacred duty, woven into the spiritual ecosystem of the city. All of this was cradled within a natural fortress of towering granite hills. These formidable formations were not just a defensive bonus, they were the city's sacred boundary, a gift from the earth that defined the urban area and provided a dramatic, rocky backdrop to the human-made splendor below. The hills themselves were often home to smaller shrines and hermitages, further blurring the line between the built city and the sanctified natural world. The entire design of Vijayanagara presents a holistic vision of urban living that modern planners now strive to recapture. Today, we speak of creating livable cities with walkable neighborhoods, accessible green spaces, and a strong sense of community identity. Vijayanagara achieved this by making livability inseparable from spiritual meaning. The city worked because it gave every daily action, shopping, washing, visiting a neighbor, a potential connection to something larger than oneself. Its ruins challenge us to ask what our own city streets are truly for. Are they merely conduits for traffic, or could they be designed as pathways for connection, meaning, and a deeper engagement with the world around us? The silent stones of its temples still outline a radical idea that a city's greatest function may be to remind its inhabitants, with every step they take, that they are part of a beautiful and purposeful whole. Stone monuments rose from the high plains as precise astronomical instruments. On the southern shores of Lake Titicaca, the city of Tiwanaku was more than a capital. It was the brain of a vast ecological machine. Between roughly the years 500 and 1000 of the Common Era, its planners achieved a feat of integration so complete it challenges our very categories of city and countryside. They did not build an urban center that simply extracted food from the land. They engineered an entire landscape where the ceremonial core and the agricultural fields were two parts of a single, breathing organism. The city's spiritual heart was a complex of staggering precision. The Akapana Pyramid, a massive stepped platform, and the adjacent Kalasasaya Temple, with its iconic Gateway of the Sun, were not placed at random. Their walls and gateways were aligned to capture the rising sun on the solstices and equinoxes, turning stone into a calendar that marked the sacred cycles of time. This celestial alignment, however, was not an abstract exercise. It was the rhythmic clock for the city's most vital physical function, the timing of planting and harvest in the surrounding fields. The heavens told the priests when to signal the farmers, weaving astronomy, religion, and subsistence into one seamless practice. The true monument of Tiwanaku, however, lies not in its carved sandstone blocks, but in the transformed earth that fed it. The Altiplano here is a harsh environment with thin air, freezing nights, and seasonal flooding. Instead of fighting these conditions, Tiwanaku's engineers embraced them with a revolutionary technology, the Suka Kalu. These were raised agricultural fields, a masterpiece of landscape hydrology. They dug networks of canals and then used the excavated soil to build long, rectangular planting beds elevated above the water table. The canals performed multiple miracles simultaneously. They captured and stored the sun's heat during the day, releasing it at night to create a protective microclimate that shielded crops from frost. They provided constant irrigation to the plant roots through capillary action. They cultivated nutrient-rich algae and aquatic plants, which could be dredged and piled onto the beds as natural fertilizer. And they teamed with fish, adding protein to the diet. This was not simple farming. It was a closed-loop, regenerative food production system built at the scale of the territory. The city's planners orchestrated this transformation across the entire Pampa Coney, turning a marginal wetland into a lush, perennial garden that could support a dense urban population without depletion. This symbiosis represents one of history's clearest early models of regional planning. Tiwanaku and its Suka Colossus were a single integrated system. The food from the fields fueled the laborers who maintained the monumental core. The authority and rituals centered in the temples organized the communal labor required to build and maintain the vast canal networks. The city could not exist without the engineered landscape, and the landscape's productivity was directed and sustained by the urban center's social organization. They were mutually dependent, two halves of a whole. This ancient insight is precisely what modern planners now term urban metabolism, the study of how a city consumes resources and produces waste. Tiwanaku's design aimed for a metabolic balance where waste from the city likely nourished the fields, and the fields perpetually nourished the city. It was a system built for resilience, for giving back as much as it took. In its silent stones and the faint, gridded traces of its fields, Tiwanaku offers a powerful lesson for an age of ecological strain. It proves that a great city is not an island of consumption, but the conscious steward of its life support system. The legacy of those raised fields asks us whether our own urban plans honor that fundamental, ancient truth, or if we have forgotten that every city, no matter how grand, is ultimately rooted in the soil. The stonework of Great Zimbabwe tells a story of social order. As you move from the elite hill complex down into the residential valleys, the very quality of the masonry changes before your eyes. Within the royal and ritual spaces, the walls are built with fine, coursed blocks, each stone carefully shaped and fitted to create smooth, imposing surfaces. This was craftsmanship as a display of power, a visual language of permanence and control. But in the valleys where the majority lived, the walls are noticeably rougher, built with less uniform stone and simpler techniques. This was not a difference in skill, but a deliberate architectural code. The city's builders used the texture of the walls themselves to visually encode the social hierarchy into the daily landscape. Walking from one district to another, you would have felt the shift in your bones, a constant, silent reminder of your place within the community. This physical manifestation of class structure is an ancient principle we still see today, from the guarded gates of exclusive neighborhoods to the stark contrast between corporate towers and modest side streets. The design made social difference not just an idea, but an experienced, tangible reality. Within the great enclosure, this control of experience took a more dynamic form. The complex is famous for its massive outer wall, but inside, a narrow, labyrinthine passage twists through the space. Scholars believe this corridor was not a mistake or a later addition, but a carefully designed feature for managing people. During important ceremonies or gatherings, this passage would have funneled participants, controlling the flow and pace of movement. It could create a sense of anticipation, separate different groups, or ensure that everyone approached the central ritual space in a prescribed order. This is crowd control engineered in stone, an ancient parallel to the entry queues, security checkpoints, and one-way pathways we design into modern stadiums, museums, and airports. The architecture itself directed the social script, using confined space to choreograph collective behavior and maintain order during moments of high significance. Yet for all this visible stratification, the city also fostered powerful bonds at a community level. The settlement pattern in the valleys suggests that extended families or kinship groups lived together in distinct clusters of huts, often surrounded by their own perimeter wall. These were neighborhoods in the truest sense, small villages within the greater metropolis. This layout would have strengthened close-knit community identity, providing a sense of belonging and mutual support. You lived not in an anonymous sea of people, but within a known circle, your cluster, while still being part of the grand project of the city. This intricate social zoning reveals the dual genius of the planners. The urban design was a tool for both unifying a vast population under a single symbolic authority, and for visibly demarcating the social differences that structured daily life. It managed the tension between collective identity and social hierarchy, building a city that was at once a cohesive whole and a mosaic of distinct parts. This ancient balancing act, etched in granite, continues to challenge every city builder who seeks to create spaces that are both orderly and truly alive. The empire moved with the seasons. On the banks of the Tigris River, the Sasanian kings built not a permanent fortress, but a grand stage for the winter months. Ctesiphon was a capital designed for a specific time and a singular purpose, to project the unchallengeable majesty of imperial Persia. When the court arrived from the cooler highlands, the city did not simply wake up, it performed. Every street, every canal, and every brick of its administrative heart was part of an elaborate production of power, a seasonal metropolis engineered for governance and awe. At the center of this performance stood the Tak Kasra, an arch of such staggering scale that its ruins still dominate the horizon. This was not a free-standing monument. It was the soaring Iwan, or vaulted audience hall, of the royal palace, the literal and symbolic gateway to the empire's power. Imagine a visiting ambassador, having traveled for weeks, being led into this space. The vault, one of the largest single-span brick arches ever constructed, would have soared overhead, seemingly unsupported, a testament to engineering genius that defied belief. The walls were lined with glittering mosaics, intricate stucco work, and vast tapestries like the legendary spring of Khosrow carpet, said to depict a garden in eternal bloom. This was psychological architecture. The design was calculated to overwhelm, to instantly communicate that the ruler who commanded such a space commanded the world itself. It was the ancient equivalent of a state-of-the-art government center fused with a grand theater, designed for the specific ritual of impressing foreign envoys and consolidating the loyalty of regional governors. To support this imperial theater, the city was a meticulously organized machine. Canals channeled water from the Tigris, not just for drinking, but to feed a network of workshops and markets. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence suggest Ctesiphon was divided into specialized districts, much like modern industrial or commercial zones. One quarter might have hummed with the sounds of metalworkers forging arms and armor for the empire's armies. Another would have been fragrant with spices and textiles, its goods arriving from across the Silk Road. This zoning ensured efficiency. The needs of the palace and the military could be met with streamlined precision, while the wealth of trade flowed through controlled channels directly into the imperial coffers. The city's layout turned economic activity into a managed resource, a principle any modern capital with a designated government district or financial quarter would recognize. Yet the most innovative aspect of Ctesiphon's design was its temporality. The city was built for winter. When the scorching Mesopotamian summer arrived, the entire court, the king, his administration, his army, and the attendant swarm of diplomats, merchants, and servants would pack up and migrate to the cooler highlands of the Iranian plateau. This was not an evacuation, it was a planned, annual cycle. Ctesiphon and its summer counterpart formed a dual capital system, an early and highly sophisticated form of climate-adaptive urbanism. The empire did not suffer the weather. It used urban design to follow the comfort of the seasons. This concept of a seasonal or rotational capital finds echoes in modern discussions about distributed governance, satellite administrative centers, and even the idea of summer capitals used by some governments today. It reflects a fluid, intelligent understanding of how a city serves its people, acknowledging that the environment is not a backdrop, but an active participant in the plan. Ctesiphan's legacy, therefore, is one of calculated spectacle and intelligent adaptation. Its grand arch was a statement in brick and mortar, a permanent advertisement of imperial authority meant to resonate long after the court had departed for the hills. And its seasonal emptiness was not a sign of weakness, but of a deeper strength, the power to design a life and an empire in harmony with the relentless turn of the earth. The silent, towering curve of the Takhtasra asks us a quiet question about our own static cities. What if power and the cities that house it were meant to be seasonal, to breathe with the rhythm of the year? Two colossal pyramids of sun-dried brick anchored the entire city to the sky. In the coastal desert of ancient Peru, the Moche capital was not a random collection of buildings, but a deliberate dialogue between two giants. The Huaca del Sol and the Huaca de la Luna, the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, stood facing each other across a wide, open plain. This was not a single ceremonial center, but a binary one. The city's entire plan unfolded in the charged space between these two monumental anchors, creating an urban stage where every activity had its designated place in relation to the sacred poles. The Huaca del Sol, the larger of the two, was likely the administrative and political heart. Its massive, tiered form, constructed from an estimated 140 million adobe bricks, spoke of a power capable of marshalling immense communal labor. The Huaca de la Luna, slightly smaller but more intricately decorated, served as the primary ceremonial and religious focus. Its walls were covered in vibrant, polychrome murals depicting deities, warriors, and complex mythological scenes. This clear functional separation, state power in one pyramid, spiritual authority in the other, created a powerful dual-axis system. The city did not have a single downtown. It had a tensile field of meaning stretched between 2 points, and every neighborhood, workshop, and plaza was defined by its relationship to both. The urban area that flourished in the plain between these huacas was meticulously zoned. Archaeologists have uncovered distinct districts for elite residences, with walls painted in bright colors and rooms arranged around courtyards. Just a short walk away, they found extensive workshops where artisans mass-produced ceramics, worked metals like gold and copper, and wove elaborate textiles. Open plazas of various sizes were strategically interspersed, serving as gathering points and marketplaces. This was not haphazard growth. It was a master plan that separated the sacred from the secular, the residential from the industrial, and the elite from the artisan, all while keeping every zone visually and physically connected to the two great pyramids. This ancient zoning code ensured that the smoky, noisy work of metallurgy did not disturb the rituals atop the Huaca de la Luna, while the elites living in their fine compounds maintained a privileged proximity to the sources of both political and divine power. The entire layout was engineered for spectacle and integration. The vast plain separating the two huacas was not empty land, it was the city's grand stage. On important ceremonial occasions, this space would have filled with people. Processions likely moved from one pyramid to the other, weaving through the plazas and past the workshops, physically connecting every segment of society to the ritual drama. The performances enacted on the terraces of the Huaca de la Luna, perhaps involving costumed priests and symbolic reenactments of myths, would have been visible to thousands gathered below. In this way, the city's design itself fostered social cohesion. Whether you were a potter, a noble, or a farmer, your place in the urban plan gave you a role and a sightline in the community's most important events. The architecture choreographed a shared experience, turning geography into a binding social force. This binary organizational principle is an ancient blueprint that still shapes our cities today. We see its echo in the paired towers of a modern financial district, two sleek peaks defining a canyon of commerce and prestige. We see it in civic centers where a city hall and a central library stand as twin pillars of democracy and knowledge, framing a grand public square. We even see it in the planned placement of major museums or stadiums on opposite ends of a park, creating a cultural corridor that energizes everything in between. The Moch planners understood a fundamental truth about human perception and order. We orient ourselves between landmarks. By giving their city two powerful, opposing anchors, they created a legible, balanced, and dynamic urban environment. Every citizen knew where they stood, literally and symbolically, in the space between the sun and the moon, between power and prayer. Their city was a machine for living, working, and worshipping, all synchronized by the silent, enduring dialogue of two mountains made by human hands. The jungle canopy was a sea of green, and the pyramids of Tikal were its islands of stone. In the dense rainforest of Guatemala, the Maya planners faced a unique challenge: how to make a city legible, powerful, and livable in an environment that constantly sought to reclaim every clearing. Their answer was to build a skyline. Structures like the immense Temple Roman IV were not placed at random. They were strategically positioned on natural limestone ridges, elevating them even further above the forest floor. From the summit of any major temple, a ruler or priest could look out and see the other great peaks of the city piercing the green horizon. For the people below, these towering landmarks served as constant visual anchors. In a landscape without street signs or maps, the pyramids were a built-in navigation system. They created a sense of place and order, transforming an overwhelming wilderness into a known human domain. This manipulation of the skyline was also a profound statement of power. The pyramids did not hide in the jungle, they dominated it, proclaiming the ability of Maya kings to reshape the very world and command the labor of thousands. It was urban planning as visual propaganda, a principle alive in every modern city whose silhouette is defined by skyscrapers. But a skyline of stone is meaningless without water to sustain the lives below it. Tikal's true genius and the key to its survival for centuries lay hidden in the ground. The city sits on porous limestone with no major rivers or lakes nearby. The seasonal rains were abundant but fleeting. The Maya response was a masterpiece of infrastructural foresight. They engineered a city-wide network of reservoirs, transforming the entire urban core into a massive rainwater catchment system. Plazas, the vast paved courtyards at the heart of temple complexes, were not just public spaces, they were carefully sloped, functioning as giant collection basins. Canals and channels carved into the stone directed every precious drop of rainfall into a series of 10 major, plaster-lined reservoirs, some capable of holding millions of gallons. This was not a backup system, it was the city's circulatory system. The placement of monumental architecture was, in part, dictated by this hydraulic logic. Buildings were arranged to funnel water toward these vital storage tanks, making every thunderstorm a communal act of replenishment. For modern cities in arid regions, Tikal offers an ancient lesson in water sovereignty, proving that the most critical infrastructure can be elegantly woven into the public landscape itself. Connecting this hydraulic and ceremonial network was a web of raised causeways. These white limestone roads built up above the muddy forest floor were the city's arteries. They linked the central plazas and reservoirs to outlying residential districts and distant farmlands. More than mere paths, these causeways structured movement and defined social space. A procession along a major causeway during a festival was a powerful spectacle, a moving thread that connected the community to its spiritual heart. They also had a starkly practical purpose, allowing the efficient transport of food, goods, and construction materials even during the torrential rainy season. This integration of transport, ritual, and urban form created a cohesive, walkable metropolis within the rainforest, a model of connectivity that feels remarkably contemporary. Ultimately, Tikal's layout was a complex equation balancing astronomy, topography, and sheer necessity. Temples were aligned to celestial events, their stairways becoming sightlines for the rising sun on a solstice. The natural ridges were used not just for height but for drainage and defense, and overarching it all was the relentless, practical management of water, the difference between a thriving capital and a forgotten ruin. Tikal teaches us that in environmentally challenging places, urban design cannot be merely aesthetic or symbolic. It must be fundamentally infrastructural. The city's form and its survival systems were one and the same. The reservoirs were as sacred as the temples they sustained because they held the lifeblood of the civilization. In its silent plazas and empty reservoirs, we see a blueprint for resilience, a reminder that the greatest cities are those that listen closely to their environment and build the answers to its hardest questions directly into their streets and stones. A stone church stands alone against a Greenlandic sky, its walls the last testament to a community that chose the edge of the world. At Valsi, the Norse did not build a city in any traditional sense. Instead, they crafted a settlement pattern of profound intelligence, a blueprint for survival in one of Earth's most marginal environments. From the 10th to the 15th centuries, their farms did not cluster together for protection or commerce. They were deliberately scattered, a necklace of homesteads strung along the deep, sheltered fjords of the eastern settlement. This was not a failure of planning, but its ultimate expression. Each farm was placed with strategic precision to control a specific micro-territory, a patch of pasture for sheep and cattle, access to seals and fish in the fjord, and perhaps a small, sheltered plot where barley might stubbornly grow. The model was imported from Scandinavia, but here it was stretched to its logical extreme, creating a low-density, dispersed urban form where the city was the entire fjord system itself, connected by boats on the water and paths along the shore. Self-sufficiency was the mandatory creed. Every homestead had to produce its own food, craft its own tools, and endure the long, dark winter largely on its own stores. This was planning for resilience through isolation, a recognition that in this fragile Arctic ecology, concentrating resources in one spot could mean collective catastrophe. Yet within this necessary isolation, the planners of this frontier understood a deeper human need. At the geographic and social heart of this scattered community, they built their anchor, the Valsi Church. Constructed from carefully fitted stone, it was far more robust than the surrounding farmsteads. This was no accident. The church was designed as the permanent gathering place, the one fixed point where the dispersed families would come together. Its strength was a promise. It would be there for baptisms, for feast days, for the vital rituals that transformed a collection of independent farmers into a congregation, a people. This designated communal space was the keystone of their social planning, the deliberate counterweight to a life of necessary solitude. It ensured that while they lived apart, they did not forget they belonged to one another. The story of Valsi, however, does not end with its careful planning. It ends with silence. By the 15th century, the settlement was abandoned. The great hall fell quiet. The church echoed only with the wind. This was not the failure of the plan, but the reaching of its limits. The Norse blueprint was exquisitely adapted to a specific climatic window, the relatively warm period known as the medieval warm period that had first lured them to Greenland. As the climate shifted into the colder Little Ice Age, the margins they lived on grew ever thinner. Sea ice increased, disrupting the vital seal hunt. Growing seasons shortened. The very environmental parameters their dispersed, resource-specific planning relied upon began to change beneath their feet. Their design, so brilliant for stability, may have lacked the flexibility for rapid, collective adaptation when the entire system was stressed. The church at Valsi, their symbol of unity, ultimately stood witness to a slow-motion retreat. This poignant end offers one of history's clearest case studies in the vulnerability of human systems to environmental change. It is a lesson carved in stone for our own era. We design our coastal cities, our agricultural regions, our very civilizations around assumptions of climatic stability, around known sea levels and predictable rainfall. H. Valsey asks us a quiet, urgent question. What happens when those assumptions, like the Greenland ice, begin to shift? Their church remains a monument not to folly, but to the sobering truth that even the most intelligent urban design exists in a delicate conversation with a world that is never truly still. A high plateau was not just a place to build a city, but a statement to the heavens. Mbanza, Congo, the capital of a kingdom that flourished for centuries in Central Africa, was founded upon a deliberate elevation. This was a choice that spoke of defense, of health, and of a profound spiritual worldview. The plateau offered a natural fortress, a refuge from potential conflict, and a place above the malarial lowlands. But more than that, it lifted the community closer to the divine. In Congo cosmology, the world of the living was mirrored by a spiritual realm, and the high ground was a sacred interface between the two. From this commanding vantage, the city unfolded not as a haphazard collection of huts, but as a meticulously ordered diagram of society and belief. Its entire layout was governed by a powerful, invisible line, a spiritual and political axis that anchored the community to both earth and sky. This axis was made visible through landmarks. At one end stood the royal palace, the seat of the Mani Congo, the king who was both a political ruler and a sacred intermediary. At the other end, following the arrival of Portuguese missionaries in the late 15th century, rose the Cathedral of the Holy Savior of Congo. But crucially, this Christian structure did not erase what came before. It was integrated into the existing sacred geography, often built near or incorporating the significance of indigenous spiritual sites, particularly sacred trees known as ensanda. These trees were themselves considered axes connecting the earthly and spiritual worlds. The city's main thoroughfare connected these points, creating a processional way for royal ceremonies and religious festivals. This was not a clash of traditions, but a conscious layering. The planners of Mbanza Congo wove new institutions into the old spiritual fabric, creating an urban landscape where power was both ancient and adaptable, where a cathedral and a sacred grove could share the same sacred alignment. Every resident knew their place in this ordered design, literally. Residential areas were not randomly assigned. They were arranged according to lineage and social status, with different clans and occupational groups occupying specific quarters of the city. The nobility lived in compounds closest to the royal precinct, their homes reflecting their rank and connection to the king. Further out were the quarters for artisans, farmers, and other members of the community. This spatial organization was a physical map of the kingdom's complex social structure. It reinforced hierarchy and identity, ensuring that the social order was experienced daily, simply by walking from one neighborhood to another. It was a form of social zoning that created stability and a clear sense of belonging within the larger urban whole. At the physical and social heart of this hierarchical city lay a space of radical openness, the Lumbu. This central public square was the democratic counterpoint to the royal palace. It was here that the community gathered for the most vital aspects of public life. The Lumbu served as a marketplace buzzing with trade, a stage for major festivals and musical performances, and most importantly, the arena for public assembly and justice. The king would often preside over legal cases here, his judgments delivered in full view of the people. This transparent practice of governance in a shared space fostered a powerful sense of collective identity and accountability. The Lumbu was the city's living room, its judicial court, and its political forum all in one, proving that ordered urban design could also provide a platform for public voice and participation. Mbanza Congo stands as a powerful testament to the sophistication of pre-colonial African urbanism. Its design, the strategic plateau, the spiritual axis, the lineage-based neighborhoods, the central public square reveals a society with a deep, intentional understanding of how to build a meaningful and functional capital. This was not an unstructured settlement. It was a carefully composed urban expression of cosmology, social order, and political power, a masterpiece of planning that challenges any simplistic view of the African past. Its legacy, etched into the very contours of the land, reminds us that the principles of great city building are universal, finding unique and profound expression in every corner of the world where people come together to create a home, a community, and a connection to something greater than themselves. The sprawling, sun-baked ruins of Chan Chan whisper a different kind of order. Here, on the arid coast of Peru, the Chimu people built a metropolis not of stone, but of earth, and they organized it not with streets, but with walls. This was the largest adobe city the world has ever known, and its genius was a radical departure from the grids and axes we have seen. Chan Chan was a city of compartments, a collection of worlds within worlds. Its planners rejected a single, unifying geometric plan in favor of something more like a cellular structure. The entire urban fabric was composed of 10 enormous walled compounds known as ciudadelas. Each of these was a fortress unto itself, a rectangular citadel enclosed by towering adobe walls that soared over 30 feet high. Step through a single, narrow gateway, and you entered a self-contained universe. Inside, you would find everything needed for a ruler and his court to exist in isolated splendor. Temples for ceremony, vast walk-in wells and reservoirs holding precious water, platforms for honoring ancestors, and labyrinthine storerooms brimming with textiles, ceramics, and other treasures. These ciudadelas were not interconnected. They stood as separate, sovereign cells in the urban body, each likely representing the legacy of a successive king, a physical dynasty built in mud. This modular design was a masterstroke of security and control. By compartmentalizing the elite, the planners minimized internal conflict and created defensible strongholds. If unrest stirred in one compound, it could be sealed off without threatening the entire city. It was urban planning as risk management, using architecture to quarantine power. Yet a city cannot function with royalty alone. In the vast, open spaces between these towering citadels thrived the true economic engine of Chan Chan. Here, in a more organic sprawl of simpler adobe structures, lived the artisans, farmers, and fishermen. This was where the city's famous workshops hummed with activity, producing the exquisite metalwork and intricate textiles that fueled Chimu wealth. The separation was absolute and intentional. The lofty, decorated world of the ciudadelas looked inward, focused on ritual and lineage, while the bustling interstices between them faced outward, focused on production and survival. This physical layout was the clearest possible expression of a segmented society, a map in clay where social class determined not just your wealth, but the very architecture that surrounded you. The walls themselves were not blank barriers. They were canvases that told the story of a people defined by the sea. Skilled artisans carved intricate friezes directly into the damp adobe, creating repeating patterns of fish, seabirds, waves, and mythical sea creatures. To walk beside these walls was to be surrounded by a sculpted ocean, a permanent reminder of the Pacific's bounty that sustained the kingdom. This was not mere decoration. It was a form of cultural coding, embedding the community's identity and its source of life into the very fabric of its buildings. The marine friezes connected daily life to a deeper ecological and spiritual reality, making the city itself a testament to its relationship with the coast. Chan Chan's compound-based planning presents a fascinating alternative to centralized models. It asks us to reconsider what makes a city cohesive. Is it the connectivity of streets, or can it be the shared purpose of distinct, specialized districts? The ciudadelas were administrative and ritual hubs, while the interstitial zones were economic and residential engines. Together, they formed a functioning whole, but one that prized compartmentalization over integration, security over open exchange. This unique approach allowed the Chimu to manage a large, complex population without a rigid grid, proving that urban order can emerge from a patchwork of powerful, inward-looking units just as effectively as from a grand, unifying diagram. In its silent, crumbling compounds, we see a city that chose to build not one palace, but 10, and in doing so, created a durable, if divided, masterpiece of human organization. The circle was the perfect shape for a city of origins. In the forests of what is now Nigeria, the ancient Yoruba city of Ife was built not as a collection of lines, but as a living, breathing ring. From perhaps the year 500 of the Common Era, this was more than a settlement. It was a cosmological diagram made physical, the spiritual birthplace of a people. Its traditional plan unfolded from a single, sacred center, the king's palace, the Afin. From this nucleus, the city's major roads radiated outward like the spokes of a wheel, dividing the urban landscape into distinct wedges before connecting to a peripheral ring road that bound everything together. This was not a defensive grid or a random organic growth. It was a deliberate, radial geometry that made the ideology of the community visible to every resident with every step they took. To live in Ife was to live within a symbol, where your home's position relative to the palace was a constant, silent reminder of your connection to the source of all order and life. This circular form, repeated in later Yoruba towns, carried profound meaning. The circle represented unity and wholeness, a community with no true beginning or end. It echoed the cyclical nature of existence, the rising and setting of the sun, the turning of the seasons, the perpetual renewal promised by the gods. The king at the center was not merely a political ruler. He was the Uni, a sacred intermediary whose very presence anchored the city to the spiritual realm. His palace was the axis mundi, the pivot point around which the entire social and cosmic order revolved. This radial planning from a central authority node is a classic urban form we still see today, from the grand boulevards radiating from the Arc de Triomphe in Paris to the diagonal avenues slicing from the Capitol and White House in Washington, D.C. It is a timeless blueprint for projecting power and organizing a populace around a shared focal point. Within the city's radiating wedges, a sophisticated social order took shape. Ife was divided into wards, each based on lineage and craft specialization. One ward might be dedicated to the revered brass casters, whose exquisite naturalistic sculptures, like the famous bronze and terracotta heads, remain some of Africa's most celebrated ancient art. Another ward would house families of weavers, farmers, or diviners. This was economic and social zoning of the most intimate kind. Your skill, your profession, and your familial identity were woven into the very geography of your home. It created tight-knit communities of shared knowledge, where craft secrets were passed down through generations within the same urban district, fostering both excellence and a powerful sense of belonging. Nature was never an outsider in this sacred geometry. Sacred groves and shrines were not relegated to the city's edge. They were carefully integrated throughout the urban fabric, nestled within wards or marking significant intersections. These were portals to the divine, pockets of untouched forest where rituals were performed, and the presence of the gods was felt most strongly. The city was not separate from the spiritual landscape, it was interwoven with it. A resident could move from the bustling craft workshop to a tranquil, hallowed grove within minutes, experiencing the seamless integration of daily labor and spiritual reverence. This design nurtured a worldview where the sacred and the secular were not opposing realms, but interconnected layers of a single, coherent reality. Ife's enduring legacy is this masterful synthesis of form and belief. Its circular plan was a tool for making abstract ideas concrete. It used geometry to teach, to remind, and to unify. The radial streets guided movement toward the center for festivals and royal ceremonies, choreographing communal participation. The lineage-based wards maintained social structure while allowing specialized economies to flourish. The integrated sacred sites ensured that spiritual practice remained a daily, accessible part of urban life. The city's design was, in essence, a physical philosophy, a three-dimensional argument about how a society should be organized, around a sacred center within a unified whole, and in constant dialogue with the forces that give life its meaning. In the quiet ruins and enduring traditions of Ife, we find a powerful testament to the idea that a city's most profound infrastructure is not its roads or walls, but the shared beliefs it so elegantly helps to hold. A city could be a journey, not a destination. Across the plains of Bagan, the horizon is not defined by walls or towers, but by 1,000 graceful spires piercing the morning mist. From the 9th to the 13th centuries, this was not a metropolis built for commerce or defense, but for an entirely different purpose: the accumulation of spiritual merit. The planners here conceived of urban space not as a container for daily life, but as a sacred landscape to be traversed. Instead of a dense, fortified core, Bagan unfolded as a vast temple field, a breathtaking expanse where over 10,000 Buddhist stupas, temples, and monasteries were scattered like jewels across the earth. Residential compounds, markets, and workshops were nestled in the spaces between them, creating a unique urban fabric where the sacred and the secular existed in intimate, interwoven proximity. This was pilgrimage urbanism. The entire city was designed to facilitate movement from one holy site to the next, transforming the simple act of walking into a profound spiritual practice. Wide, unpaved avenues and countless footpaths created a network of potential routes, allowing pilgrims to chart their own course through a living mandala of brick and stucco. The experience was intentionally immersive. At every turn, a new vista of architectural splendor would unfold, each structure telling a story of the donor who built it and the Buddha it honored. The city's design made spirituality a physical, sensory experience. The feel of worn stone underfoot, the scent of incense drifting from a doorway, the awe of a golden spire catching the last light of day. It was urban planning as a guide for the soul, choreographing a personal journey toward enlightenment with every step. To support this endless flow of seekers, the city's infrastructure was brilliantly adapted. Monasteries or kyongs were not isolated retreats. They were integrated way stations, providing accommodation, food, and teaching for the pilgrims who arrived from across Asia. These compounds functioned like a distributed network of hotels and community centers, ensuring that visitors could stay for days or weeks, sustained by the monastic community as they moved from temple to temple. This system created an economy and an urban rhythm based on transient observance, a precursor to the hospitality networks that support modern religious pilgrimages to Mecca, Varanasi, or the Camino de Santiago. The entire spiritual enterprise rested on a foundation of remarkable earthly engineering. To sustain the permanent monastic population and the seasonal surges of pilgrims, Bagan's rulers mastered the waters of the nearby Irrawaddy River. They constructed an extensive system of canals, weirs, and reservoirs that captured monsoon rains and river overflow, channeling life-giving water to rice paddies and vegetable gardens. This hydraulic grid was the unseen engine of the temple field. It turned the arid plain into a fertile oasis, ensuring that the city could feed itself and its countless guests, freeing the community to focus on spiritual pursuits rather than mere survival. The irrigation channels were as vital to Bagan's existence as the processional roads, a perfect marriage of practical necessity and sacred ambition. In this way, Bagan presents a stunningly pure example of purpose-driven urban design. Every element of the city, the placement of temples to create awe-inspiring sightlines, the network of monasteries for lodging, the irrigation system for sustenance, served the primary goal of facilitating merit-making and spiritual journey. It functioned like a permanent, large-scale festival city, its infrastructure built to handle massive, rhythmic influxes of people whose purpose was devotional, not commercial. The legacy of this temple field challenges our narrow definitions of a city's success. It asks us to consider an urban center not by its political power or economic output, but by its capacity to inspire, to transform, and to facilitate a deeper connection between its inhabitants and the transcendent. The silent, soaring temples of Bagan stand as a testament to a society that believed the highest function of a city was not to house the body, but to nourish the spirit, turning an entire landscape into a staircase toward the divine. The colonnaded street leading to the Virupaksha temple was not merely a path, but a living economic artery. Its generous width, shaded by a continuous stone canopy, created a perfect environment for commerce to thrive regardless of the fierce sun or seasonal rains. This was urban design with a clear commercial logic. Built into the supporting columns were countless shops, their open fronts inviting customers into cool, sheltered spaces. Above these shops, accessed by stairways, were the living quarters for the merchants and their families. This arrangement, shops below and homes above, represents a brilliant early model of the mixed-use street, a design that maximized land use, kept the merchant close to their trade, and infused the avenue with round-the-clock life. It was efficiency and community woven into a single architectural form. Beneath the bustle of shoppers and the rhythm of daily trade, another layer of engineering ensured the street's cleanliness and longevity. Careful channels were carved along the edges of the paved surface, designed to carry away wastewater and monsoon downpours swiftly and efficiently. This attention to sanitation and maintenance reveals a municipal mindset, a recognition that a great commercial center required not just grand design, but diligent upkeep. The avenue was built to endure, to remain a pristine stage for both the mundane and the magnificent, for these streets were designed with a dual purpose in mind. On ordinary days, they functioned as vibrant markets filled with the scent of spices, the glitter of jewels, and the vibrant colors of textiles. But on festival days, the same thoroughfares transformed. The colonnades provided a perfect frame for grand processions, where temple chariots, caparisoned elephants, and thousands of devotees would flow toward the sacred gates. The architecture understood that commerce and ceremony were not separate realms, but two expressions of the same thriving urban heart. The wide space allowed for the seamless shift from marketplace to processional way, proving that the most functional urban spaces are those that can hold multiple meanings at once. Walking this street today, you can trace a direct lineage to the spaces we cherish in our own cities. The colonnaded walkway finds its echo in the shaded arcades of European cities or the covered galleries of modern shopping centers. The mix of retail below and residence above is the foundational principle of countless downtowns and main streets, and the idea of a street designed as much for festive gathering as for daily errands lives on in our pedestrianized high streets and festival marketplaces. The planners of Vijayanagara understood something timeless, that the most successful urban spaces serve the whole person, blending the practical need to buy and sell with the deeper human desires for community, celebration, and beauty. Their bazaar streets were not accidents of growth, but deliberate blueprints for a life richly lived, where every purchase could be part of a procession, and every shopfront was a seat for the greatest show in town. An island became the heart of an empire. Rising from the shallow waters of Lake Texcoco, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was not built in spite of its watery foundation, but because of it. Founded around the year 1325, this city transformed the very limitations of its island site into the core principles of its design. The result was a metropolis of staggering scale and sophistication, a floating garden of stone and earth where every canal, every causeway, and every cultivated plot was part of a single, brilliant hydrological equation. The city's layout was a precise grid, but not one of simple streets. It was a dual network of land and water. Canals served as the primary transportation arteries for canoes, moving people and goods with silent efficiency through neighborhoods, while parallel walkways and streets provided for pedestrian movement. At the city's heart lay the sacred precinct, dominated by the Templo Mayor, a massive double pyramid dedicated to the gods of rain and war. This was the cosmological axis, the point where the earthly and divine realms met, and from which the city's orderly grid expanded. To connect this island capital to the mainland, Aztec engineers constructed 3 massive causeways running north, south, and west. These were not simple dirt paths. They were engineered marvels, raised stone roadways wide enough for 10 horsemen abreast, with removable bridges at intervals to allow canoe traffic to pass and to serve as defensive choke points. These causeways functioned as the ancient world's most elegant transit corridors, seamlessly integrating the island city into the regional landscape of the valley. They were the lifelines for trade, for military campaigns, and for the integration of tribute from conquered territories, all flowing directly into the bustling markets and ceremonial core. Yet the true genius of Tenochtitlan was how it fed itself. The city's population likely swelled to over 200,000 people, a density that would challenge any pre-industrial society. The solution was not imported from distant farms but invented on the spot. The Aztecs perfected the chinampa system. These were not mere floating gardens as they are sometimes called. They were artificial islands constructed by staking out rectangular plots in the shallow lake bed, weaving together reeds and stakes to form a fence, and then layering the area with rich mud from the lake bottom, aquatic vegetation, and compost. The resulting plots were incredibly fertile, anchored by willow trees whose roots stabilized the perimeter. A network of canals between the chinampas provided constant irrigation and canoe access for farmers. This was intensive, sustainable agriculture happening in the city's immediate periphery, a green belt of breathtaking productivity that could yield multiple harvests each year. The integration was total. The waste from the city, carefully managed, helped fertilize the chinampas. The food from the chinampas fed the city. The canals that watered the gardens also transported the harvest directly to urban markets. This created a nearly closed-loop local food system that turned an apparent constraint limited land into an overwhelming advantage. The entire urban organism lived in a symbiotic balance with the lake. Tenochtitlan's design presents a profound lesson for the modern age, especially for coastal and delta cities grappling with flooding and food insecurity. Here was a dense urban center that did not fight its wetland setting, it leveraged it. The chinampas acted as a sponge, absorbing floodwaters and filtering nutrients. The canals managed water flow and transportation simultaneously. The city's form was a direct and intelligent response to its environmental context. The tragic irony is that this masterpiece of hydraulic balance was ultimately destroyed by conquest, its canals filled in, its lake largely drained to make way for the colonial city that would become Mexico City. Today, modern engineers and urban planners are looking back at these ancient principles, studying chinampa-like systems for urban agriculture and water management as they confront rising sea levels and the need for local food resilience. Tenochtitlan stands as a hauntingly beautiful blueprint, a vision of a city that did not merely exist on the water, but was woven from it, a testament to the idea that our greatest urban challenges may already have been solved, if only we know where to look. Happiness was not an accident but a design specification. In the 13th century, as the first Thai kingdom declared its independence, its founders did not just need a capital, they needed a manifesto. They built Sukhothai, a name that translates poetically to dawn of happiness, and they gave that abstract ideal a precise physical form. This was not urban planning for defense or commerce alone. It was architecture as a moral instrument. The entire city was conceived as a three-dimensional model of the Buddhist and Hindu cosmos, a tool to guide its inhabitants toward righteous living simply by walking its streets. The blueprint began with a perfect rectangle defined by sturdy walls and encircling moats. This shape was not arbitrary. It represented the mythical continent of the universe as described in ancient texts, a sacred geometry made real. To live within these walls was to dwell inside a diagram of cosmic order, a constant, subtle reminder that human society should mirror the harmony of the heavens. At the very heart of this rectangular world rose the spiritual anchor, the Wat Mahathat Temple. Its central prang or spire symbolized Mount Meru, the axis mundi believed to stand at the center of all creation. From this sacred core, the city's meaning radiated outward. Major avenues likely aligned with this central point, organizing movement and sightlines around the temple, ensuring it remained the visual and spiritual focus from almost anywhere within the walls. This layout made theology experiential. A resident's daily journey to the market or a farmer's return from the fields would be a pilgrimage around the cosmic mountain, integrating spiritual contemplation into the rhythm of ordinary life. But this was not a city of stone alone. The planners of Sukhothai understood that serenity required nature. They masterfully integrated the built environment with a lush, watery landscape. A network of canals channeled water from the nearby Yom River, feeding numerous ponds and reservoirs that dotted the urban area. These were practical, providing water for drinking and agriculture, but they were also aesthetic and spiritual. The reflective surfaces of the ponds multiplied the image of the sacred temples, creating pockets of calm and beauty. Orchards and gardens were planted throughout, softening the geometry of the streets and filling the air with the scent of blossoms and fruit. The result was a park-like setting, a green city where the boundaries between architecture and landscape gently blurred. This intentional blending created a therapeutic environment, a place designed to soothe the senses and calm the mind long before the term existed. The city's very name, Dawn of Happiness, reveals its foundational purpose. It was an aspirational project, a belief that the right physical environment could cultivate collective well-being and ethical conduct. The straight, orderly streets discouraged chaos and encouraged mindful movement. The abundant water and greenery promoted health and tranquility. The central temple provided a daily reminder of higher principles. Every element worked in concert to shape not just where people lived, but how they felt and how they behaved. In this, Sukhothai presents a powerful ancient argument that resonates deeply today. Modern urban design increasingly speaks of wellness communities, of biophilic cities that reduce stress by integrating nature, of neighborhoods that foster social connection and mental health. These are not new ideas. They are a rediscovery of a principle Sukhothai embodied centuries ago, that the form of a city is never neutral. It can either fray our nerves or mend them, isolate us or connect us, pull us toward mindless consumption or guide us toward quiet reflection. The silent, graceful ruins of Sukhothai, with its lotus ponds mirroring broken spires, ask a question of our own crowded, noisy metropolises. What if our streets and squares were designed not just for efficiency, but for the slow cultivation of joy? What if a city's success was measured not by its economic output, but by the peaceful dawn it promised to every single soul within its walls? These silent stones across the continent speak a common language. The fundamental questions of urban life, how we share water, how we move together, how we build belonging, have echoed for thousands of years, and the answers left in these ruins feel less like ancient history and more like a conversation across time. The strict grid of Mohenjo-Daro is a blueprint for order that any modern traffic engineer would recognize. The water temples of Angkor are a masterclass in ecological balance that our climate-stressed cities are now struggling to relearn. The rooftop streets of Çatalhöyük and the forest gardens of Calakmul show us radically different, yet profoundly successful, visions of community woven into the natural world. These places were not primitive drafts of the city to come. They were fully realized, sophisticated experiments in creating a human habitat. Each was a unique answer to the universal puzzle of how to live well together, proving that sustainable, livable design is not a modern invention, but a recurring human achievement. Our journey through these 35 rediscovered blueprints reveals a stunning truth. The greatest urban innovations are not always about new technology, but about timeless wisdom applied with deep observation and communal intent. The planners of Petra did not have polymers for pipes, so they carved channels into solid rock. The builders of Mesa Verde lacked steel for skyscrapers, so they used the cliff face itself to create vertical density. They worked with the materials and forces they had, and in doing so, they often achieved a harmony with their environment that our own cities, for all their power, are still seeking. This is the profound lesson etched into every weathered brick and overgrown causeway. As we face our own urban futures with challenges of density, climate, and social connection that feel unprecedented, these ancient models offer a deep well of inspiration. They teach resilience through integrated systems like the chinampas of Tenochtitlan. They teach community through intentional gathering spaces like the lumbu of Mbanza, Congo. They teach identity through sacred geometry like the radial streets of Ife. They remind us that a city is more than infrastructure. It is the physical story of what a society values most. So the next time you walk down a straight street, relax in a public park, or even rely on clean water from a tap, look around. You are walking in the footsteps of planners from a forgotten dawn. The echoes of Mohenjo-Daro, Teotihuacan, and Great Zimbabwe are all around us, in the very principles that shape our daily lives. Let their rediscovered wisdom inspire your view of the city around you, not as a finished product, but as the latest chapter in humanity's oldest and most creative project, building a home together.